Chapter 1. The Hidden Inheritance. Harry Potter could have stayed at the Dursleys forever, he thought dimly, as he followed Hagrid's massive form through the gleaming marble corridors of Gringotts' wizarding bank. It would have been easier, somehow, to remain in that cramped cupboard under the stairs, believing himself to be nothing more than a freak who made strange things happen when he was angry or afraid. But the giant man beside him had shattered that careful lie with 3 simple words. "You're a wizard, Harry." Now, walking deeper into this impossible world of goblins and magic, Harry felt as though he were drowning in possibilities he didn't understand. The birthday that had begun with Dudley's tantrum over presents had transformed into something resembling a fever dream. Magic was real. His parents hadn't died in a car crash. And somewhere in the depths of this gleaming bank lay a fortune that belonged to him. "Vault 687, Hagrid rumbled to the goblin behind the tall desk, producing a tiny golden key from somewhere within his enormous coat. "And here's Harry Potter's letter from Hogwarts, if you need proof of who he is." The goblin, Griphook, Harry thought he'd been called, examined both items with fingers that seemed too long and eyes that held an intelligence Harry hadn't expected. When those dark eyes fixed on Harry himself, he felt exposed, as though the creature could see straight through to whatever made him different from other boys his age. "Indeed," Griphook said, his voice carrying an odd formality that made Harry stand straighter. "Follow me, Mr. Potter. Your vault awaits." The journey into the depths of Gringotts felt like descending into the earth's heart. The cart careened along impossibly narrow tracks, past waterfalls that fell upward, and doors that had no handles, but opened with whispered words in languages Harry didn't recognize. Beside him, Hagrid gripped the cart's sides with white knuckles, looking decidedly green around the edges. "First time's always rough," Hagrid muttered, though whether to Harry or himself wasn't clear. "Even worse than I remembered this." Harry found he didn't mind the wild ride. After 11 years of having every aspect of his existence controlled and constrained, the reckless plunge into darkness felt like freedom. He closed his eyes and let the underground wind whip through his unruly hair, tasting something like hope on his tongue. The cart slowed, then stopped with a grinding of metal against stone. Griphook dismounted with fluid grace, while Harry and Hagrid clambered out rather less elegantly. Before them stood a door that looked as though it had been carved from a single piece of dark wood, with no visible lock or handle. "Vault 687, Griphook announced, placing one pale hand flat against the door. "The Potter family vault." Something in his tone suggested reverence, though Harry couldn't imagine why. He was just Harry after all, the boy who lived in a cupboard and burned breakfast, and made Uncle Vernon's face turn purple with rage. The door swung open on silent hinges, and Harry's breath caught in his throat. Gold. Mountains of it. Galleons spilled across the floor like scattered starlight, or stacked in precarious towers that reached nearly to the ceiling. Silver sickles formed gleaming rivers between the golden peaks, while bronze knots filled the spaces between like dark earth. But it wasn't the money that made Harry's knees weak. It was the knowledge that this belonged to him. To his parents, to a family that had loved him enough to leave him provided for. "Blimey," Hagrid whispered, his earlier nausea apparently forgotten. "I'd forgotten how much there was. Your parents were well respected, Harry. Popular. And your dad came from a very old wizarding family." Harry stepped into the vault, his trainers silent on the stone floor. The walls were lined with shelves containing objects he didn't recognize, books bound in leather that seemed to shimmer in the torchlight, jewelry that pulsed with its own inner glow, and what looked like family portraits whose subjects turned their painted heads to watch him pass. It was overwhelming, beautiful and terrifying, and completely impossible to process. Harry reached out to touch a stack of galleons, just to prove to himself that they were real, and his fingers brushed against something unexpected. An envelope. Cream-colored parchment that looked newer than everything else in the vault, tucked between 2 towers of gold as though someone had placed it there deliberately. Harry's name was written across the front in handwriting he didn't recognize, but somehow knew. For Harry James Potter, to open on his 11th birthday. His hands shook as he picked it up. The parchment was warm to the touch, humming with a magic he could feel in his bones. Behind him, he heard Hagrid shuffling closer, but the sound seemed to come from very far away. "What's that, then?" Hagrid asked, his voice carefully casual, in a way that made Harry think the half-giant was trying not to seem too curious. "I don't know," Harry said quietly, turning the envelope over in his hands. There was a seal on the back, green wax impressed with what looked like a doe. As his fingers traced the image, the wax grew warm, then began to glow with soft light. The seal dissolved. Harry's fingers moved without conscious thought, unfolding the parchment within. The writing was definitely feminine, flowing script in ink that looked as though it had been applied with a careful hand. "My dearest Harry, if you are reading this, then you have survived to see your 11th birthday, and for that, I am more grateful than you can possibly know. I pray that you have grown up loved and safe, though I fear that may not be the case. If Albus has kept to his plans, you are likely learning about our world for the first time, and there are things I must tell you before you take another step into it. I am writing this on what I believe may be our last night. James is downstairs, checking the wards for the 100th time, and you are sleeping in your cot, unaware that tomorrow may not come. Peter has just left after assuring us once again that our secret is safe with him. I want to believe him. I must believe him. But something in Albus Dumbledore's eyes when he suggested Peter for the role troubles me deeply. Harry, my son, I need you to understand that not everyone who claims to act for the greater good can be trusted. Albus Dumbledore is a great wizard, but greatness and righteousness are not the same thing. He has been managing the members of the Order of the Phoenix in ways that make me increasingly uncomfortable. He speaks often of necessary sacrifices, of acceptable losses, of the wisdom that comes with age and experience. But I am your mother, and my wisdom tells me that you should not have to carry the weight of this war on your shoulders, no matter what prophecies may say. If something happens to James and me, I want you to know that there are people in this world who can be trusted, people who will put your well-being above any cause, no matter how noble it may seem. These are the individuals I would trust with your life. Sirius Black, your godfather and James's best friend. Whatever anyone may tell you about him, whatever crimes he may be accused of, know that Sirius loves you as his own, and would never, ever willingly see you harmed. Remus Lupin, my friend and a man of honor, despite the burden he carries. He may be afraid to act on his convictions, but his heart is true. Alastor Moody, paranoid perhaps, but his paranoia has kept him alive, and will keep you alive if you listen to him. He questions everything, including authority, which is exactly what you should do. Frank and Alice Longbottom, good people who fight because they must, not because they enjoy it. They understand the difference between necessary action and needless sacrifice. Kingsley Shacklebolt, a man who believes in justice over politics. If the ministry becomes involved in your life, he is one of the few who can be trusted to remember that laws should protect people, not powerful men's secrets. And finally, my son, I must warn you about Peter Pettigrew. I pray I am wrong about him, but my instincts scream danger when I watch him these days. If he has betrayed us, if that is how you came to be orphaned, please know that it was not your father's fault for trusting, nor mine for doubting. Sometimes evil hides behind familiar faces. Harry, whatever Albus Dumbledore may tell you about destiny or duty or the greater good, remember this. You are my son first. The wizarding world's anything second. You have the right to choose your own path, to question authority, to demand explanations before you act. Do not let anyone convince you that your life is worth less than their cause, no matter how noble that cause may be. Be brave, my darling boy, but be smart too. Trust carefully and love fiercely. And never forget that your parents loved you enough to die for you, not for a prophecy, not for a cause, but for you. All my love, always. Mum P.S. The family grimoire is hidden behind the Shakespeare collection in our old house. Albus doesn't know about it. Trust the goblins to help you retrieve it safely. Harry's hands were shaking so badly that the letter rustled like autumn leaves. His vision blurred, and he realized with distant surprise that he was crying. Not the silent, careful tears he'd learned to shed in his cupboard, but great, heaving sobs that seemed to tear something loose inside his chest. "Harry?" Hagrid's voice was gentle, concerned. "What is it? What's wrong?" Harry couldn't speak. He could only stand there in a vault full of gold, holding his mother's final words, and feel his entire understanding of the world rearrange itself around this impossible gift. His parents had loved him. His mother had been worried about Dumbledore. Sirius Black, who everyone said was a dangerous criminal, was innocent. Peter Pettigrew was the real traitor, and Albus Dumbledore, the great wizard who had decided where Harry would live and how he would grow up, had been planning to use him for something even before he was old enough to walk. "Harry, lad, you're scaring me," Hagrid said, taking a tentative step closer. "What's in that letter?" Harry looked up at the half-giant's kind, worried face and felt something harden inside his chest. Hagrid worked for Dumbledore. Hagrid had come to fetch him on Dumbledore's orders. Hagrid probably believed, as everyone seemed to, that Dumbledore always knew best. "Tell it's nothing," Harry lied, folding the letter carefully and slipping it into his jacket pocket. Just something my parents left for me. I'm fine." Hagrid's beetle-black eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't press. "Well then, best get what you need and head back up. Still got your school things to buy, don't we?" Harry nodded, moving mechanically to fill the small leather pouch Hagrid offered with galleons and sickles. His hands moved without conscious thought while his mind raced. His mother had warned him about trusting blindly. She'd told him to question authority, to be smart as well as brave. So what was he supposed to do now? As they climbed back into the cart for the return journey, Harry's hand moved instinctively to his jacket pocket, where his mother's letter rustled softly against the parchment of his Hogwarts acceptance letter. 2 pieces of paper that represented 2 completely different futures. One where he followed Dumbledore's plans, whatever they might be, and one where he chose for himself. The cart began its wild ascent toward the surface, carrying Harry Potter away from his inheritance and toward the most important decision of his young life. Chapter 2. The Goblin's Truth. The cart ride back to the surface felt different this time. Where before Harry had found the wild careening exhilarating, now it seemed to mirror the chaos in his thoughts. His mother's letter burned like a live coal in his jacket pocket, each word replaying itself in his mind with devastating clarity. Peter Pettigrew was the traitor. Sirius Black was innocent. And Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, according to everyone Harry had met, had been planning to use him before he could even walk. Harry glanced sideways at Hagrid, who was gripping the cart's sides with white knuckles and muttering what sounded like prayers under his breath. The half-giant had rescued him from the Dursleys, had opened the door to this magical world, had been nothing but kind. But he worked for Dumbledore. He followed Dumbledore's orders. How much did Hagrid know? How much had he been told to keep secret? The cart shuddered to a stop at the marble platform, and Harry climbed out on unsteady legs. His mind felt fractured, trying to hold too many impossible truths at once. He needed time to think, to plan, to figure out what his mother's warnings meant for his future. But Hagrid was already steering him toward the exit, muttering about getting to Diagon Alley before the shops closed. "Wait," Harry said suddenly, his voice catching. I need to ask about something. About the vault." Hagrid paused, frowning down at him with concerned, beetle-black eyes. "What about it, Harry? Seemed straightforward enough to me." Harry looked around the gleaming marble hall, at the goblins bent over their ledgers and the wizards conducting their business with quiet efficiency. Everyone seemed so normal, so unaware that his entire world had just been turned upside down. I want to understand some things about my parents' accounts. Would that be all right?" "Course it would," Hagrid said, though his frown deepened. "Though I'm not sure what there is to understand. Vault's yours now. Simple as that." But Harry had already turned back toward the tall desk where Griphook was updating a massive leather ledger with a quill that moved of its own accord. The goblin looked up as Harry approached, those dark, intelligent eyes fixing on him with what might have been interest. "Mr. Potter," Griphook said, setting down his quill with deliberate care, "how may Gringotts serve you further?" Harry felt Hagrid settle beside him like a watchful mountain, but he forced himself to focus on the goblin's sharp features. His mother had said to trust it carefully. She'd also said that goblins could be trusted to help him retrieve something from his parents' house. Maybe they could be trusted with other things too. "I wanted to ask about my parents," Harry said quietly. "About their relationship with certain people. People who might have tried to access their accounts." Griphook's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes. "That is a rather specific inquiry, Mr. Potter. Gringotts takes client confidentiality very seriously, as I'm sure you understand." "Of course," Harry said quickly. "But they were my parents, and I'm their heir. Don't I have a right to know who tried to interfere with what they left me?" For a long moment, Griphook studied him in silence. Harry could feel Hagrid shifting uncomfortably beside him, could sense the half-giant's growing confusion, but he didn't look away from the goblin's penetrating stare. "An interesting question," Griphook said finally, "and one that suggests you have reason to believe such interference occurred." Harry's hand moved instinctively to his jacket pocket, where his mother's letter rustled softly against the fabric. "I have reason to believe a lot of things that I didn't know this morning." Something that might have been approval crossed Griphook's angular features. "Indeed. Mr. Hagrid, perhaps you would care to examine our rare magical artifacts display while Mr. Potter and I discuss some rather dry financial matters?" Hagrid looked between them uncertainly. "Well, I suppose that would be all right. Long as you don't mind, Harry. Won't go far." "I don't mind," Harry said, and was surprised to find that he meant it. Whatever Griphook might tell him, he suspected it would be easier to hear without Hagrid's loyal, trusting presence, as a constant reminder of how complicated this was all going to become. Hagrid wandered off toward a display case filled with glittering objects, and Griphook gestured for Harry to follow him to a smaller, more private alcove off the main hall. The space was lined with more ledgers and filled with the soft scratch of quills writing in the background. "Now then," Griphook said, settling behind a smaller desk and steepling his long fingers. "What exactly would you like to know about the attempts to access your inheritance, Mr. Potter?" Harry's breath caught. "So there were attempts?" "Oh yes," Griphook said, and his tone carried a distinct note of satisfaction. "Multiple attempts, beginning approximately 6 hours after news of your parents' deaths reached the wizarding community. All unauthorized, all denied." 6 hours? Harry whispered. His parents had been dead for barely a day before someone had tried to get at their money. The casual greed of it made him feel sick. But the first attempt came from Albus Dumbledore, Griphook continued, watching Harry's face carefully. "He claimed authority as your magical guardian, though no such appointment had been made through proper channels. He wished to access your trust vault to ensure your continued care and education. We declined." Harry's hands clenched in his lap. "What else?" "Over the following weeks, there were 17 more attempts. Mr. Dumbledore submitted paperwork claiming the right to redirect funds from your family vault to various war relief efforts. Each time we requested proper documentation of his guardianship. Each time he was unable to provide it. Griphook paused, tilting his head slightly. It became quite tiresome, actually. "But why didn't he have guardianship?" Harry asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "If he placed me with my relatives—" "Ah," Griphook said, leaning back in his chair. "That is where things become interesting. Mr. Dumbledore did indeed place you with your mother's sister and her family. However, he never filed the proper paperwork with the Wizengamot to make this arrangement legal. In the eyes of wizarding law, you have never had a magical guardian appointed." The words hit Harry like a physical blow. "Never. But that means— It means that for nearly 11 years, your placement has been entirely informal. Not illegal, precisely, but certainly irregular. It also means that no one has had the legal authority to make decisions about your magical inheritance, your education, or your future." Griphook's dark eyes glittered. "Gringotts has been your de facto guardian in such matters, all following the ancient laws regarding orphaned heirs." Harry stared at him, trying to process the implications. "So all this time, Dumbledore has been making decisions about me that he had no right to make." "That would be the goblin perspective?" "Yes." "What other kinds of decisions?" Harry asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. Griphook reached into a drawer and withdrew a folder thick with parchment. "Mr. Dumbledore has submitted numerous requests over the years regarding your future. Educational stipulations, social restrictions, even a rather creative attempt to establish a magical binding contract that would have required you to follow his guidance until you reached your majority." He paused, looking directly at Harry. "All denied, of course, or for lack of proper authority." "A binding contract?" The words came out as barely a whisper. "Quite comprehensive," Griphook said, with what Harry was beginning to recognize as goblin disdain for human legal maneuvering. "It would have compelled your obedience to his educational and life directives, restricted your access to your inheritance until you completed tasks he deemed necessary, and granted him the authority to make major decisions about your future without your consent." He closed the folder with a soft snap. "The goblins have always found human attempts to circumvent free will distasteful." Harry felt dizzy. The Dumbledore that everyone described as the greatest wizard of the age, the leader of the fight against dark magic, had tried to legally enslave him, had tried to steal from his parents' legacy, had acted without any real authority for Harry's entire life. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you asked," Griphook said simply, "and because you are now of age to make your own financial decisions regarding your trust vault. Gringotts believes in informed clients making informed choices." Harry took a shaky breath, thinking of his mother's letter, of her warnings about trusting carefully and questioning authority. "If I wanted to contact some of the people my parents trusted," he said slowly, "people who might help me understand what my options are, would Gringotts be willing to help with that?" Griphook's expression sharpened with interest. "Gringotts has always maintained strict neutrality in human political affairs, Mr. Potter. We neither take sides nor involve ourselves in your wars. However, we are willing to act as secure intermediaries for our clients' correspondence, particularly when those clients are minors who may need additional protection." "Protection from what?" "From those who might seek to intercept or manipulate their communications," Griphook said delicately. "Gringotts' postal services are more secure than standard owl post, and we are bound by ancient magic to maintain the confidentiality of our clients' affairs." Harry thought of Sirius Black, rotting in a prison cell for crimes he didn't commit, of Remus Lupin, who his mother had said was honorable but afraid, of the others on her list, people who might help him understand what his options were, who might stand with him against whatever plans Dumbledore had been making. "How would it work?" he asked. "Or you would compose your letters," Griphook explained. "Gringotts would ensure their secure delivery and handle any responses. The service is discreet and efficient, and unlike Owl Post, our couriers cannot be tracked, intercepted, or corrupted by outside magical influence. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. For 11 years he had let other people make every important decision about his life. His uncle and aunt, who hated him. Dumbledore, who apparently saw him as a tool to be managed and controlled. Even today, he had been prepared to let Hagrid guide him through this new world without question. But his mother's letter had changed that. She had given him names, people to trust, people who would put his well-being above their cause. She had told him to be smart as well as brave, to choose his own path. "I'd like to send some letters," Harry said quietly. "Very good," Griphook said, producing parchment and a self-inking quill from somewhere beneath his desk. "Take all the time you need, Mr. Potter. Gringotts is at your service." Harry accepted the writing materials with hands that trembled slightly. Through the archway, he could see Hagrid examining a display of magical artifacts, still unaware that the boy he had rescued was quietly arranging to change the course of his own life. As Harry settled the parchment before him and lifted the quill, he thought of his mother's words. "Be brave, my darling boy. But be smart too. Trust carefully and love fiercely. And never forget that your parents loved you enough to die for you. Not for a prophecy, not for a cause, but for you." He began to write. Chapter 3. Letters to the Lost. Harry stared at the blank parchment for a long time before he wrote the first word. How did you begin a letter to someone you'd never met? Someone who had loved your parents? Someone who might be the key to changing everything? How did you convince a stranger that the boy they'd been told was safely tucked away with loving relatives was actually writing from the heart of a conspiracy they'd never suspected? The answer, Harry realized, was with the truth. All of it. "Dear Mr. Lupin," he began, his hand moving with more confidence than he felt, "I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Harry Potter, and I believe you knew my parents, James and Lily Potter, when they were alive." He paused, considering his words carefully. Griphook had said their postal service was secure, but Harry still felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he'd never experienced before. One wrong word, one misplaced trust, and this fragile plan could collapse before it truly began. "I am writing to you because I discovered something today that I believe you need to know. My mother left a letter for me, sealed to open only on my 11th birthday. In it, she named you as someone she trusted, someone who would put my well-being above any cause, no matter how noble. I hope she was right about you, Mr. Lupin, because I desperately need someone I can trust." Harry pulled his mother's letter from his jacket pocket, smoothing it carefully on the desk. Even looking at her handwriting again made his chest tight with grief for parents he barely remembered. "The letter reveals things about Albus Dumbledore that I think you should know. My mother suspected that he was manipulating members of the Order of the Phoenix, managing them for what he called the greater good. She was uncomfortable with his talk of necessary sacrifices and acceptable losses. Most importantly, she believed that Peter Pettigrew was going to betray them, not Sirius Black." Harry's hand trembled as he wrote those words. If he was wrong about Remus Lupin, if his mother had misjudged the man's character, this letter could destroy any hope of freeing Sirius or protecting himself. But his mother had died trying to keep him safe, and she had trusted this man enough to name him in her final words. "Mr. Lupin, I need to know what really happened the night my parents died. I need to know why Sirius Black never received a trial, and I need to know if there's any way to prove his innocence. Because my mother's letter suggests that the real traitor has been free for nearly 11 years. I am currently living with my mother's sister and her family. Without going into details, I can tell you that this arrangement is not what my parents would have wanted for me. I have also learned today that Dumbledore never had legal authority to place me there, and that he has made multiple attempts to control my inheritance and my future through various magical contracts, all of which were denied by the goblins at Gringotts. I am including a copy of my mother's letter so that you can see for yourself what she believed about the people around her. I hope that you will contact me soon, because I don't think I can navigate this alone, and I'm not sure how much time I have before Dumbledore realizes I know the truth. Please, if you cared about my parents at all, help me understand what really happened to them. Sincerely, Harry James Potter. Harry set down the quill and read through the letter twice, checking for anything that might seem too forward or too naive. He was 11 years old, after all, and however mature this day had forced him to become, he couldn't afford to sound like he was pretending to be older than he was. Satisfied, he carefully copied his mother's letter onto a second piece of parchment, his hand cramping by the time he finished reproducing her elegant script. When both letters were complete, he sealed them in an envelope and addressed it to Remus J. Lupin, with no other location. Griphook had assured him that goblin couriers could find anyone in the wizarding world, no matter how well hidden they might be. The second letter was easier, though no less important. "Dear Mr. Shacklebolt," he wrote, "I am Harry Potter, son of James and Lily Potter. I am writing to you because my mother named you in a letter as someone who believes in justice over politics, and I desperately need someone with that perspective to advise me. I have recently learned that Sirius Black, who was convicted of betraying my parents to Lord Voldemort, never received a proper trial. I have also learned that there is evidence suggesting the real betrayer was Peter Pettigrew, who was never officially declared dead, despite being presumed so for nearly 11 years. As someone who works within the Ministry's legal system, would you be able to tell me what options exist for challenging a conviction when new evidence comes to light? And would you be able to tell me what the proper legal procedures should have been when I was orphaned? I am not asking you to take any action at this time. I simply need to understand what my rights are and what might be possible if evidence of Mr. Black's innocence could be produced. Thank you for your time and consideration. Respectfully, Harry James Potter." The third letter was the most difficult. Harry had never heard of Alastair Moody beyond his mother's description, but something about the way she had written about him, paranoid but true, someone who questioned everything, including authority, made Harry think this man might understand his situation in ways the others couldn't. "Dear Mr. Moody," he wrote, "you don't know me, but you knew my parents, James and Lily Potter. My mother left me a letter that describes you as someone who questions everything, including authority, and suggests that you might be willing to help someone who has discovered that the adults in his life may not have his best interests at heart. I have learned today that Albus Dumbledore has been making decisions about my life since I was 15 months old, despite having no legal authority to do so. I have also learned that he attempted to establish magical contracts that would have compelled my obedience to him until I reached my majority. My mother's letter suggests that she suspected him of manipulating the members of the Order of the Phoenix for his own purposes. Mr. Moody, if you knew my parents, then you know they would not want their son to be used as a tool in someone else's war, no matter how noble the cause might seem. I am writing to ask for your advice about how someone my age might protect themselves against magical manipulation or coercion. Are there defenses I should learn? Precautions I should take? I realize this letter may seem strange, coming from an 11-year-old boy, but I would rather seem strange than remain ignorant of dangers that might threaten me. Any advice you could offer would be greatly appreciated. With respect, Harry James Potter. By the time Harry finished the third letter, his hand was aching and his head was swimming with the magnitude of what he was attempting. 3 letters to 3 strangers, each one a leap of faith based on nothing more than his mother's word and his own desperate need to find adults who would help rather than control him. He sealed all 3 letters and carried them back to where Griphook waited with patient goblin efficiency. 3 letters, Harry said quietly, placing the envelopes on the desk. All urgent, but the first one especially so. Griphook examined the addresses with his dark eyes, nodding once. These will be delivered within the hour, Mr. Potter. Any responses will be brought directly to you, regardless of your location. How will you find me? Gringotts has its methods, Griphook said, with what might have been amusement. You are our client. We protect our client's interests. Harry felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. For the first time since reading his mother's letter, he wasn't completely alone with the knowledge of what had been done to him. Thank you, he said simply. To think nothing of it, Griphook replied. Now, I believe Mr. Hagrid is becoming restless. Perhaps you should rejoin him before he begins to worry. Harry found Hagrid examining a display of what looked like medieval torture devices, though the placard claimed they were antique defensive implements of the Goblin Wars. The half-giant looked up with obvious relief when Harry approached. There you are. Thought you'd gotten lost in all that paperwork. Everything sorted then? Yes, Harry said, and was surprised to find that he meant it. I think I understand things better now. Good, good, Hagrid said, steering him toward the exit. Now then, we've got a lot of shopping to do if we want to get you ready for Hogwarts. Books, robes, cauldron, wand. Can't forget the wand. That's the most important bit. As they emerged into the bright sunlight of Diagon Alley, Harry felt the familiar weight of his mother's letter in his pocket and the new lightness that came with taking action. Somewhere, 3 letters were making their way to 3 people who might be able to help him. Somewhere, the truth was beginning to move. Hagrid, Harry said, as they walked through the crowded street. When you're buying school supplies, do students usually get extra books? I mean, beyond what's on the list? Well, some do, Hagrid said thoughtfully. Bright students mostly, or ones with particular interests. Why? Seen something that caught your eye? Harry had been thinking about his mother's postscript, about the family grimoire hidden behind Shakespeare in their old house, or about Griphook's offer to help retrieve things safely. But he was also thinking about what Griphook had told him about Dumbledore's attempts at magical contracts, about binding spells and compulsions. I was wondering about defensive magic, Harry said carefully, and maybe some books about wizarding lore. I'd like to understand my world better. Hagrid beamed at him. Knew you had your parents' brains. Course we can look for some extra books, though I'd stick to the basic stuff for now. Some of the advanced defensive magic can be a bit much for someone just starting out. They spent the next several hours moving through the shops of Diagon Alley. Harry bought his school books and robes, a cauldron and scales, and finally, with a sense of ceremony that made his heart race, his wand. 11 inches, holly and phoenix feather. The brother wand to the one that had killed his parents. But he also bought other things. A trunk with multiple compartments and advanced security charms. A set of books on basic defensive magic that the clerk at Flourish and Blots assured him were suitable for beginners. A slim volume titled Wizarding Lore for Young Witches and Wizards that looked like it had been written specifically for people his age who needed to understand their rights. And, after some careful consideration, a pair of 2-way mirrors that the shopkeeper claimed would allow secure communication between partners, no matter how far apart they were. Planning to stay in touch with friends? Hagrid asked, noticing the mirrors. Something like that, Harry said. By the time they returned to the leaky cauldron for dinner, Harry was exhausted, but oddly hopeful. Now his new purchases were safely stored in his expanded trunk, his letters were on their way to people who might help him, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was taking control of his own destiny. They had just finished eating when a sleek black bird landed on the windowsill beside their table. Not an owl, Harry realized, but something that looked more like a raven, with intelligent golden eyes and midnight feathers that seemed to absorb light. Goblin courier, Hagrid said, frowning. Don't see many of those. Wonder what they want. But Harry already knew. The raven tapped the window with its beak and extended one leg, where a small scroll was tied with silver ribbon. Harry's heart hammered as he accepted the message, his fingers trembling as he unrolled the parchment. The handwriting was careful and precise, of the words written in dark blue ink. Mr. Potter. Your letter has shaken me to my core. If what you say is true, and the copy of Lily's letter you included suggests it is, then I have been a fool and a coward for nearly 11 years. I cannot undo the harm my inaction has caused, but I can try to help you now. I will meet you tomorrow, at noon at the Leaky Cauldron. Look for a man with greying brown hair reading the Standard Book of Spells. I will be alone, and we will talk about everything. Sirius, your parents, Dumbledore, and what options you have for your future. Be careful who you trust, Harry. Your mother was right to be suspicious, and you are right to question the adults who have made decisions about your life without your knowledge or consent. But know that there are some of us who will help you, if you'll let us. Until tomorrow, R.J. Lupin. Harry read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Tomorrow, he would meet someone who had known his parents, someone who believed him, someone who was willing to help. Everything all right, Harry? Hagrid asked, looking concerned. You've gone a bit pale. It's fine, Harry said, carefully folding the letter and tucking it into his jacket beside his mother's words. Just something about my Hogwarts preparations. But as they finished their meal and prepared to return to the Dursleys, for what Harry hoped would be one of the last times, he felt a new kind of anticipation building in his chest. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would bring allies. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of everything. Chapter 4. The Werewolf's Confession. Harry arrived at the Leaky Cauldron 15 minutes early, his stomach twisted into knots that had nothing to do with the breakfast he'd barely managed to choke down under Aunt Petunia's disapproving glare. He'd told the Dursleys he was meeting Hagrid again to pick up a few forgotten school supplies, and Uncle Vernon had been so eager to get him out of the house that he hadn't questioned the story. The pub was busier than it had been the day before, filled with wizards and witches conducting the ordinary business of their extraordinary lives. Harry found a corner table where he could watch the entrance and tried to look like he belonged, like meeting strange adults in magical pubs was something he did regularly, rather than something that made his hands shake and his mouth go dry. He'd read Remus Lupin's letter so many times that he could recite it from memory, but he pulled it out again anyway, studying the careful handwriting for clues about the man who had written it. The tone was formal but warm, apologetic but determined. It was the letter of someone who had been carrying guilt for a very long time, and had finally found a chance to do something about it. At exactly noon, a man with greying brown hair and a lined face that spoke of years of weariness entered the pub. He was holding a copy of the Standard Book of Spells, and scanning the room with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to trust appearances. When his eyes met Harry's, the book nearly fell from his fingers. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the crowded room. Harry saw his father's height and build, but something gentler in the posture, less confident. The man's robes were patched and worn but clean, and there was a kind of quiet dignity in the way he carried himself, despite what were obviously reduced circumstances. "Mr. Potter?" the man said softly as he approached the table, and his voice carried the same careful formality as his letter. "I'm Remus Lupin. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Thank you for coming," Harry replied, standing to shake the offered hand. Lupin's grip was firm but gentle, and Harry caught a faint scent of something wild and woodsy that reminded him of the Forbidden Forest. They settled into chairs across from each other, and Harry watched as Lupin's eyes traced his face with an intensity that made him squirm. "You have your mother's eyes," Lupin said quietly, and there was such naked grief in his voice that Harry felt his chest tighten. "But your father's everything else. The resemblance it's quite extraordinary." "You knew them well?" Harry asked, though he thought he already knew the answer from the pain written across Lupin's features. They were my best friends, Lupin said simply. Along with Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew, we called ourselves the Marauders when we were at Hogwarts. We were inseparable, or so I thought. His hands clenched around the book he still held. I should have realized sooner what Peter was becoming. I should have fought for Sirius when he was arrested. I should have insisted on seeing you after your parents died, should have made sure you were truly safe and happy. My mother's letter said you were honorable but afraid, Harry said gently. What were you afraid of? Lupin's laugh was bitter. Everything, it seems. Losing my position, losing what little acceptance I'd managed to find in the wizarding world, disappointing Dumbledore's expectations. He met Harry's eyes directly. I'm a werewolf, Harry. Have been since I was very young. Dumbledore was the only headmaster who would allow me to attend Hogwarts, the only employer who would hire me despite my condition. I thought I owed him everything. Harry felt a shock of recognition. This was the burden his mother had mentioned, the reason she'd described Lupin as afraid to act on his convictions. He used that against you. He didn't have to, Lupin said quietly. I used it against myself. Every time I questioned one of his decisions, every time I wondered if there might be a better way, I reminded myself of how much I owed him. I told myself that a monster like me had no right to question a great man's choices. You're not a monster, Harry said with more certainty than he felt. He knew nothing about werewolves, except the terrifying stories Uncle Vernon sometimes told to explain away unexplained noises in the night. But he knew what he saw across the table. A tired, sad man who was clearly fighting his own conscience. Lupin's smile was the first genuine expression Harry had seen from him. Your mother said the same thing, many times. She had a gift for seeing the person beneath the affliction. His expression grew somber again. Which is why I should have listened when she started expressing doubts about Dumbledore's methods. What kind of doubts? Lupin was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. She came to me 3 weeks before she died. She was agitated, frightened in a way I'd never seen before. She said Dumbledore had been pressuring her and James to make certain arrangements for your protection, arrangements that didn't feel right to her. The Fidelius charm? Among other things. Lupin looked up sharply. How much do you know about what happened that night? Only what my mother's letter told me, that Peter was made secret keeper instead of Sirius, and that she suspected he would betray them. It was Dumbledore's suggestion, Lupin said, and the words seemed to cause him physical pain. He said that Sirius was the obvious choice, which made him a dangerous one. He convinced James that using Peter would be safer because no one would suspect him, that your father trusted Dumbledore's judgment completely. But my mother didn't. No, she told me that something about the way Dumbledore presented the plan bothered her. She said he seemed too eager to have control over the details, too insistent that it had to be done exactly his way. She wanted to know if there were other options, other protective spells that might be safer. Lupin's hands tightened around his book. I told her to trust Dumbledore. I told her he knew best. The simple words carried such weight of regret that Harry felt his own throat close up. You couldn't have known what would happen. Couldn't I? Lupin asked, and there was something almost fierce in his quiet voice. I knew Peter better than anyone. I knew he was weak, easily frightened, always looking for the strongest person to hide behind. I knew he'd been acting strangely in the months before your parents went into hiding. But I didn't say anything, because I didn't want to cause trouble, didn't want to question Dumbledore's wisdom. Harry tried to imagine what it must have been like, living with that knowledge for nearly 11 years. What happened after they died? Sirius was arrested within hours. No trial, no chance to explain or defend himself. I was devastated by grief, and Dumbledore told me it was better if I stayed away, better if I didn't get involved. He said the situation was too volatile, that my condition would only make things worse for Sirius if I tried to speak on his behalf. Lupin's voice grew bitter. He also reminded me that I would need his recommendation for any future employment, and that my association with a convicted mass murderer wouldn't help my prospects. He threatened you. He didn't need to threaten me directly. The implication was clear enough, and like a coward, I convinced myself he was right. I told myself that Sirius was probably guilty, that I'd been wrong about him, just like I'd been wrong about Peter. It was easier than admitting that I'd failed my best friends when they needed me most. Harry studied the man across from him, seeing the years of self-recrimination written in every line of his face. What about me? Did you ever ask to see me? Once. Lupin's smile was wry and painful. About 6 months after you'd been placed with your relatives. I wrote to Dumbledore asking if I could visit, just to make sure you were well. He wrote back, explaining that it would be better for everyone if you were allowed to grow up away from the wizarding world, away from the shadows of your parents' deaths. He said that seeing me would only confuse you and make it harder for you to form healthy attachments to your new family. My new family, Harry repeated, and he couldn't keep the bitterness out of his voice. Did he tell you how they were treating me? Lupin's eyes sharpened. He said you were thriving. He said your aunt and uncle loved you as their own, that you were happy and safe and normal. He paused, studying Harry's expression. That wasn't true, was it? Harry thought about the cupboard under the stairs, about years of being told he was a freak and a burden, about Dudley's fists and Uncle Vernon's belt and Aunt Petunia's cold hatred. No, what it wasn't true. The change that came over Lupin's face was startling. The guilt and self-recrimination transformed into something much more dangerous, a quiet, focused anger that reminded Harry that for all his gentleness, this was a man with a wolf living under his skin. Tell me, Lupin said simply. So Harry did. Not everything. He wasn't ready for that level of vulnerability with anyone. Not yet. But enough. The cupboard, the chores, the way the Dursleys spoke about magic and about him, the years of being treated like a dangerous inconvenience that they were obligated to tolerate. By the time he finished, Lupin's hands were clenched into fists, and his eyes had taken on a golden tinge that made Harry think of autumn leaves and moonlight. 11 years, Lupin said quietly. 11 years I could have fought for you. I could have demanded to see you, could have insisted on proper oversight of your placement, and instead I trusted a man who was perfectly content to let you suffer as long as it served his greater plan. What greater plan? Harry asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. I don't know all of it, Lupin admitted, but I know Dumbledore has always believed in the value of hardship for building character. He's spoken often about how adversity shapes us, how struggle makes us stronger. I suspect he believed that a difficult childhood would prepare you for the role he envisions you playing in the future. The casual cruelty of it took Harry's breath away. He wanted me to suffer. I think he wanted you to be grateful, Lupin said grimly. Grateful enough to follow his guidance without question when the time came. A boy who grew up loved and secure might have been harder to control than one who was desperate for acceptance and approval. Harry felt something cold settle in his stomach. Is that what I am? Desperate for approval? Lupin looked at him for a long moment, and when he smiled, it was sad, but genuine. I think you're a boy who has every right to be angry about what's been done to you, and every right to question the adults who made those choices. Your mother would be proud of how you've handled yourself in this situation. Will you help me? Harry asked. Will you help me find a way to prove Sirius is innocent? Yes, Lupin said without hesitation. I owe it to your parents, and I owe it to Sirius, but most of all I owe it to you. I've spent 11 years being a coward. It's time I remembered how to be a marauder. He pulled out parchment and a quill, writing quickly. These are the names of people who might be willing to help us. Kingsley Shacklebolt at the Ministry, Your mother was right to trust him. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She's fair-minded and doesn't owe Dumbledore any personal loyalty. Emmeline Vance, who served in the Order and has grown increasingly uncomfortable with some of Dumbledore's methods. You think they'll listen to us? I think they'll listen to the evidence, especially if it comes with testimony from someone who was there. Lupin folded the parchment and handed it to Harry. I'll start reaching out to them quietly, feeling out their willingness to re-examine Sirius's case. In the meantime, you should be careful. Dumbledore has ways of monitoring people he's interested in, and he's been interested in you for your entire life. What kind of monitoring? Portraits, mostly. And he has allies throughout the Ministry and the wizarding community. People who report back to him about anything unusual. Lupin paused. He also tracks me during the full moon, supposedly to ensure I'm not a danger to anyone. But it means he knows where I am and who I meet with on a regular basis. Then meeting with me was dangerous for you. Everything worthwhile is dangerous, Lupin said simply. And this is worthwhile, Harry. Your parents died believing they were protecting you, and were going to make sure their sacrifice meant something. As they prepared to leave, Lupin reached across the table and squeezed Harry's shoulder gently. I know this is overwhelming, and I know you've learned more about the adult world in the past 2 days than most children learn in years. But you're not alone anymore. I won't fail you the way I failed your parents. Harry looked up into those kind, tired eyes and felt something ease in his chest that had been tight for as long as he could remember. For the first time in his life, he had an adult on his side who put his welfare above everything else. What happens now? Harry asked. Now we gather allies and evidence, Lupin said, and then we make sure the truth finally sees the light. As they left the leaky cauldron together, Harry felt the weight of his mother's letter in his pocket and the new lightness that came with shared burdens. The fight for Sirius's freedom, and his own, had officially begun. Chapter 5. The Aura's Investigation. The response from Kingsley Shacklebolt arrived 3 days after Harry's meeting with Remus, delivered by the same sleek black courier that had brought Lupin's reply. Harry was in his room at Privet Drive, supposedly organizing his school supplies, but actually reading through the defensive magic books he'd purchased in Diagon Alley when the bird tapped against his window with unusual urgency. The letter was brief but alarming. Mr. Potter, your inquiry regarding Sirius Black's case has prompted some unofficial research on my part. What I have discovered is deeply troubling and requires immediate attention. I would like to meet with you as soon as possible to discuss what I've found. More importantly, I have shared your concerns with Amelia Bones, head of Magical Law Enforcement. She has agreed to review the case files personally. What she discovered in those files has shaken both of us considerably. Can you meet us tomorrow evening at 8 p.m? Remus Lupin has suggested the back room at the Hog's Head in Hogsmeade as a secure location. If this time doesn't work, please send word immediately. This matter is more urgent than you may realize. Yours in service to justice, Kingsley Shacklebolt Senior Aura, Ministry of Magic. Harry read the letter twice, his heart racing. The formal tone couldn't quite hide the underlying alarm, and the mention of Amelia Bones made this feel, suddenly, terrifyingly real. He was no longer a boy with suspicions and a dead mother's letter. He was at the center of what sounded like an official investigation. He sent his reply immediately, confirming the meeting, but then spent the rest of the day in a state of anxious anticipation. The Dursleys, thankfully, were too absorbed in their own concerns to notice his distraction. Uncle Vernon was dealing with what he called a crisis at work, which seemed to involve a great deal of shouting into the telephone, while Aunt Petunia was obsessing over preparations for some neighborhood social event that Harry was explicitly not invited to attend. The next evening, Harry slipped out of the house after dinner, using the story that he was meeting Hagrid again for last-minute school preparations. The journey to Hogsmeade felt longer than it should have, and by the time he reached the Hog's Head, his palms were sweating, despite the cool evening air. The pub was exactly what he'd expected from its reputation: dim, grimy, and filled with the kind of patrons who preferred their conversations unheard and their business unexamined. Harry made his way to the back room that Lupin had specified, his heart hammering against his ribs. The room was small and private, lit by a single flickering candle that cast dancing shadows on the rough wooden walls. Remus was already there, looking more alert and determined than Harry had seen him before. Beside him sat a tall black man with a calm, intelligent face and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Across from them, a stern-looking witch with greying hair and sharp eyes was studying a thick folder of documents. "Harry," Remus said, rising as he entered, "thank you for coming. And this is Kingsley Shacklebolt and Amelia Bones." Kingsley stood and offered his hand with a firm grip and a smile that didn't quite reach his worried eyes. "Mr. Potter, I'm glad you reached out to us, though I wish the circumstances were different." Amelia Bones studied him with the intensity of someone accustomed to evaluating evidence and witnesses. When she spoke, her voice was crisp and professional, but not unkind. "Mr. Potter, before we begin, I need you to understand that what we're about to discuss could have significant consequences for a number of very powerful people. Are you certain you want to proceed?" Harry thought of Sirius Black, rotting in Azkaban for crimes he didn't commit. He thought of his mother's letter, warning him about acceptable losses and necessary sacrifices. But he thought of 11 years of living in a cupboard, while the adults who controlled his life convinced themselves they were acting in his best interests. "I'm certain," he said. Amelia nodded once, as if his answer satisfied some test she'd been conducting. "Very well. Kingsley, would you like to begin with what you found?" Kingsley leaned forward, his expression grim. "Mr. Potter, when you wrote asking about legal procedures for challenging wrongful convictions, I decided to review Sirius Black's case as an example. What I found was highly irregular." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "There are no trial records for Sirius Black. None. No transcripts, no witness statements, no evidence logs. According to official ministry records, he was arrested on November 1st, 1981, and transferred directly to Azkaban the same day." "That's impossible," Harry said. "Don't all prisoners get trials?" "Under normal circumstances, yes," Amelia said, opening her folder. "But these were not normal circumstances. Bartemius Crouch Sr., who was then head of magical law enforcement, had been granted emergency powers during the war. These powers allowed him to authorize immediate imprisonment of suspected Death Eaters without trial, provided the evidence was overwhelming." "What evidence?" Remus asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "That's the problem," Kingsley said. "The evidence file is remarkably thin. There are statements from Muggle witnesses about an explosion that killed 13 people, but no magical analysis of the scene. There's a report claiming that Black was found standing over the wreckage, laughing, but no indication that anyone actually questioned him about what happened." Amelia flipped through several pages. "More troubling still, there's no record of Veritaserum being administered, despite it being standard procedure for all suspected Death Eaters. There's also no record of anyone attempting to verify Black's claim about being Secret Keeper, despite the obvious importance of that information." "Someone didn't want the truth to come out," Harry said quietly. "That's certainly one interpretation," Amelia agreed. "But what's even more interesting is this." She pulled out another document. "Peter Pettigrew was never officially declared dead. According to ministry records, he remains classified as missing or presumed deceased. That classification has never been updated or confirmed." The implications hit Harry like a physical blow. "But if he's not dead, then there's no reason he couldn't surface whenever he chose to," Kingsley finished. "And if he surfaces alive, it raises significant questions about who actually betrayed your parents and why Sirius Black was so eager to track him down that night." Remus buried his face in his hands. I should have demanded answers. I should have insisted on seeing the evidence. But Dumbledore said it would only make things worse, said the case was clear-cut, and that questioning it would only prolong everyone's pain. About Dumbledore, Amelia said, and something in her tone made everyone look up sharply. His involvement in expediting Black's imprisonment is extensively documented. He provided written testimony supporting Black's immediate transfer to Azkaban, citing the danger of allowing a betrayer of the Order to remain in Ministry custody where he might be rescued or might escape. He helped put Sirius away, Harry said, the words barely above a whisper. He did more than that, Kingsley said grimly. He also provided assurances that the Potter heir would be safely placed with blood relatives and wouldn't require Ministry oversight. That testimony was used to justify why no magical guardian was appointed for you through proper Wizengamot channels. Harry felt the room tilt slightly. I should have had a guardian appointed by the Wizengamot? Absolutely, Amelia said firmly. Any orphaned heir, particularly one of your significance, or should have been assigned a magical guardian within 30 days of their parents' deaths. That guardian would have been responsible for overseeing your care, education, and inheritance until you reached majority. But that never happened? Dumbledore's testimony assured the relevant ministry departments that formal guardianship wouldn't be necessary, Kingsley explained. He claimed to be monitoring your situation personally and vouched for your relative's suitability. Based on his reputation and the trust placed in him, the usual procedures were waived. The casual way his entire childhood had been dismissed as usual procedures made Harry's stomach churn. So my placement with the Dursleys was never legal? It was legal in the sense that it wasn't explicitly forbidden, Amelia said carefully. But it was highly irregular and potentially harmful to your interests. A properly appointed guardian would have had legal obligations to ensure your welfare, visit regularly, oversee your magical education, and protect your inheritance. None of that happened. Because Dumbledore convinced everyone it wasn't necessary, Harry said. Because Dumbledore convinced everyone that he was handling it personally, Remus corrected quietly. And no one questioned the word of Albus Dumbledore. Kingsley leaned back in his chair, studying Harry with something that might have been respect. The question now, Mr. Potter, is what you want to do with this information. We have enough evidence to demand a formal review of Black's case, and possibly enough to challenge the circumstances of your placement as well. But once we start down this path, there's no going back. What do you mean? I mean that formally challenging Dumbledore's decisions will make you enemies, Amelia said bluntly. He has allies throughout the Ministry, throughout the wizarding world. People who believe in him. People who owe him favors. People who have built their careers on his recommendations. They won't appreciate a 16-year-old boy questioning their judgment. I'm 11, Harry corrected. Even worse, she said with a grim smile. They'll see you as an ungrateful child who doesn't understand the sacrifices that were made on your behalf. The political ramifications could be significant. Harry looked around the table at these 3 adults who barely knew him, but were willing to risk their careers and reputations to help him seek justice for Sirius and accountability for himself. That they were offering him a choice: stay quiet and accept the life that had been planned for him, or fight for the truth and accept the consequences. My mother told me to be brave but smart, Harry said slowly, and she told me never to let anyone convince me that my life was worth less than their cause. If we can prove Sirius is innocent, if we can show that I've been manipulated and controlled my entire life, then isn't that worth the risk? It could change everything, Remus warned. Your relationship with Dumbledore, your future at Hogwarts, the way the wizarding world sees you. Maybe it's time for things to change, Harry said. Maybe it's time for people to stop making decisions about other people's lives without their consent. Amelia smiled, and for the first time since he'd entered the room, it was genuinely warm, Water spoken like someone who understands what justice really means. Very well, Mr. Potter. If you're committed to this course, then so are we. What's our next step? Harry asked. We gather more evidence, Kingsley said. I'll continue reviewing ministry files, looking for anything that might support our case. Amelia will begin the process of formally requesting a review of Black's conviction. And I'll reach out to other Order members, Remus added. People who might be willing to testify about Dumbledore's methods during the war. What can I do? Harry asked. For now, be careful, Amelia said seriously. Don't let on that you know any of this. Continue with your normal preparations for Hogwarts, and trust no one outside this room until we tell you it's safe. As they prepared to leave, Kingsley placed a hand on Harry's shoulder. You're braver than you know, Mr. Potter. Your parents would be proud. Harry thought of his mother's letter, of her warnings about questioning authority and choosing his own path. As he made his way back to Privet Drive through the darkness, he felt the weight of what they were attempting settle around him like a cloak. Tomorrow, he would wake up and pretend to be an ordinary boy preparing for his first year at Hogwarts. But tonight, he was part of something bigger. Tonight, he was fighting for justice, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't fighting alone. Chapter 6. The Order's Resistance. The letter from Alastor Moody arrived at dawn 5 days later, delivered by what looked like a mechanical owl with glowing red eyes and armor plating where feathers should have been. Harry had been lying awake since 4 in the morning, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything he'd learned about magical law and ministry corruption, when the strange bird tapped against his window with metallic precision. The letter itself was written in cramped, paranoid handwriting, with words occasionally scratched out and replaced, as if the writer had been constantly second-guessing himself. Potter, got your letter. Took me 3 days to verify it wasn't a trap or an imposter. Your mother's handwriting checks out. I've got samples from Order communications. More importantly, the magical signature on the parchment matches what I'd expect from a letter that's been sealed for 11 years. You're either telling the truth, or you're the most sophisticated liar I've encountered in 40 years of hunting dark wizards. Given that you're 11 years old, and I'm inclined to believe the former. We need to meet. Soon. I've been watching Dumbledore for longer than you might think, and what you've told me fits patterns I've been tracking for years. But we can't meet anywhere public, anywhere normal, anywhere he might have ears. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., there's an abandoned warehouse in the Muggle Industrial District outside Little Whinging, Grimmauld Road, building with the broken clock tower. Come alone. Tell no one where you're going, not even Lupin. If you're being followed or monitored, abort and try again another day. Trust no one completely, Potter. Not even me. But if you want answers about what your godfather went through, what your parents really faced, and what Dumbledore has been hiding from the Order for decades, then we need to talk. Constant vigilance. A. Now Moody Harry read the letter twice, his heart racing. The paranoia that dripped from every line should have been frightening, but instead it felt validating. Here was an adult who took the idea of Dumbledore's deception seriously, who had apparently been harboring his own suspicions for years. The abandoned warehouse was exactly as described, a hulking brick structure with broken windows and a clock tower that had stopped working sometime in the distant past. Harry approached it carefully, every nerve on edge, half expecting to find Death Eaters or ministry officials waiting for him. Instead, he found only shadows and the musty scent of long disuse. A voice spoke from the darkness before he could see its owner. Potter, you came alone. Good. First test passed. Alastor Moody stepped into a shaft of dusty sunlight, and Harry had to suppress a gasp. The man was a walking catalogue of battle scars, chunks missing from his nose and ear, a wooden leg that clicked against the concrete floor with each step, and most unnervingly, an electric blue magical eye that swiveled independently of its normal counterpart. Expecting someone prettier? Moody growled, but there was dark humor in his voice. This is what happens when you spend your career fighting dark wizards who don't like to lose. Each scar's got a story, and most of those stories end with someone in Azkaban. Mr. Moody, Harry said, trying to keep his voice steady. Thank you for meeting me. Don't thank me yet, Moody said, limping closer. Might be I'm about to ruin your life entirely. Might be what you're asking for is more dangerous than staying ignorant. His magical eye focused on Harry, while his normal eye swept the surrounding area. But your mother was a good woman, and if she thought Dumbledore was up to something, then she probably was right. You knew my mother well? Well enough. She was one of the few Order members who asked uncomfortable questions during briefings. Most of the others just nodded along when Dumbledore explained his strategies, but Lily would press for details, alternatives, exit strategies. She had a sharp mind for tactics and no patience for unnecessary risks. Moody's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile. Drove Dumbledore mad, actually. He prefers followers to collaborators. Harry felt a surge of pride mixed with grief. She asked questions about his methods? Among other things. Sit down, Potter. This is going to take a while. Moody gestured toward some old crates that had been arranged like chairs. Your mother wasn't the only one who noticed that Dumbledore's version of the greater good required an awful lot of individual sacrifices from other people. As they settled into the makeshift seating, Moody's magical eye continued its restless surveillance of their surroundings. I've been watching Dumbledore for 15 years, Potter. Not openly, I'm not stupid. But watching. And what I've seen, he shook his grizzled head. The man's got a talent for being in the right place at the right time, if you know what I mean. What do you mean? I mean that Dumbledore has an uncanny ability to benefit from other people's tragedies. Your parents die, and suddenly he's got control over the boy who lived. The Longbottoms get tortured into madness, and suddenly the only other family that might have challenged his authority over you is eliminated. Sirius Black gets thrown in prison without a trial, and suddenly Harry Potter has no godfather to interfere with his upbringing. The casual way Moody laid out the pattern made Harry's stomach clench. You think he planned all of it? I think he's smart enough to recognize opportunities when they arise, and ruthless enough to make sure those opportunities aren't wasted. Moody leaned forward, his normal eye boring into Harry's face. The question is whether he just took advantage of circumstances, or whether he helped create some of those circumstances in the first place. What do you mean about the Longbottoms? Moody was quiet for a long moment, his magical eye spinning in its socket, as if looking for threats in dimensions Harry couldn't perceive. Frank and Alice Longbottom were good Aurors, Potter. More than that, they were moral Aurors. They believed in following proper procedures, getting warrants, treating suspects with dignity, even when those suspects were Death Eaters. They weren't comfortable with some of the methods Dumbledore encouraged during the war. What methods? Unforgivable curses on prisoners, enhanced interrogation techniques, preemptive strikes on suspected Death Eater families. Moody's voice was matter-of-fact, but Harry could hear the underlying disgust. As the Ministry authorized some dark magic during the war, Potter. Desperate times, desperate measures, all that. But the Longbottoms refused to participate. They filed formal complaints. Harry felt cold dread settling in his chest. And then they were attacked. 3 days after Voldemort fell. 3 days after the war was officially over, when Death Eaters should have been surrendering or fleeing, not launching revenge attacks. Moody's magical eye fixed on Harry with uncomfortable intensity. The Lestranges and Barty Crouch Jr. tortured them, looking for information about Voldemort's whereabouts. But here's what never made sense to me. How did they know where to find the Longbottoms? Frank and Alice were in hiding, protected by the same kinds of wards that protected your parents. Someone told them where to look. Someone who knew their location and had reason to want them silenced. Moody nodded grimly. I could never prove it, of course. but it struck me as awfully convenient that the two Order members most likely to cause problems for Dumbledore's post-war plans were eliminated so efficiently. Harry thought about Neville Longbottom, who would be starting Hogwarts with him this year, a boy whose parents had been tortured into madness, leaving him to be raised by his grandmother, while Dumbledore continued making decisions about the wizarding world's future without any inconvenient questions about his methods. "How many others?" Harry asked quietly. "How many others what? How many other Order members died or were eliminated in convenient ways?" Moody studied him for a moment, and something that might have been approval flickered in his normal eye. "Smart question. The answer is more than you'd expect from random chance. The Prewett brothers, Molly Weasley's brothers, killed in what was supposed to be a routine mission that turned into an obvious trap. Marlene McKinnon and her whole family, murdered by Death Eaters who somehow knew exactly when she'd be visiting her parents. Dorcas Meadows are killed by Voldemort personally after she started asking questions about Order security. All of them asked questions. All of them had either questioned Dumbledore's methods or were in positions where they might interfere with his long-term plans." Moody's voice carried the weight of old anger, and all of them died in circumstances that were just a little too convenient for maintaining Dumbledore's control over the Order. Harry felt overwhelmed by the scope of what Moody was suggesting. Why didn't anyone else notice the pattern? Some did. But Dumbledore's very good at managing information flow, Potter. He compartmentalizes missions, keeps members from comparing notes, uses magical oaths to prevent people from discussing certain topics outside of authorized channels. Moody's laugh was bitter. Half the Order was bound by loyalty oaths that prevented them from criticizing his leadership, even to each other. Magical oaths? Binding spells that compel honesty, loyalty, silence, whatever Dumbledore needed from his followers. Voluntary, of course, always presented as necessary security measures to protect the organization. Moody spat into the dust. Amazing how many good people will agree to magical compulsion if you convince them it's for the greater good. Harry thought about Remus, about his years of guilt-ridden silence, his inability to question Dumbledore's decisions even when his conscience told him something was wrong. Could that be why nobody fought for Sirius? Why nobody questioned his imprisonment? Could be. But loyalty oaths are tricky things. They can prevent you from acting on suspicions even when those suspicions are correct. Moody's magical eye swiveled to focus on something behind Harry, then returned to its restless scanning. "Which is why what you're doing is so important, Potter. You're not bound by any oaths. You don't owe Dumbledore anything. You can ask the questions the rest of us couldn't." A new voice spoke from the shadows near the entrance. "And you can inspire others to break free from obligations they never should have accepted in the first place." Harry spun around to see a woman emerging from the darkness, middle-aged, with steel-grey hair and intelligent eyes that held the same wary competence he'd seen in Moody and Kingsley. She moved with the fluid grace of someone trained in combat, but her expression was warm despite the caution. "Emmeline Vance," Moody said without surprise. "Right on time." "Mr. Potter," the woman said, offering him a respectful nod. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but Alastair thought you should hear from someone who witnessed Dumbledore's manipulation firsthand." Miss Vance was one of the Order members who tried to raise concerns about Dumbledore's methods, Moody explained. "Tell him about the information control." Emmeline settled onto another crate, her movement economical and precise. During the war, Dumbledore controlled all intelligence gathering and distribution. No one else in the Order was allowed to develop independent sources or verify information through outside channels. Everything we knew about Death Eater activities, Ministry infiltration, even the safety of our own families, came through him. "That doesn't sound necessarily wrong," Harry said carefully. "It wasn't, until you realized that he was editing the information before passing it along. Mission briefings that omitted crucial details. Intelligence reports that understated dangers. strategic plans that put certain members at higher risk than others. Her voice tightened. I lost 3 good friends on missions where Dumbledore's briefings failed to mention known Death Eater positions. Accidentally? I thought so at the time. But when I tried to investigate, when I requested access to the original intelligence reports, I was told that level of detail wasn't necessary for someone of my clearance level. Emmeline's smile was sharp with old anger. Apparently, a blind trust was more important than tactical awareness. Harry looked between Moody and Emmeline, seeing the same pattern of manipulation and control that had shaped his own life played out on a larger scale. How many people know about this? More than Dumbledore realizes, Moody said with grim satisfaction. Your letters to Lupin and Shacklebolt have started conversations that have been suppressed for too long. Word is spreading that someone is finally asking the right questions. What kind of conversations? Former Order members comparing notes about missions that went wrong. Ministry employees reviewing old cases with fresh eyes. Even some current Hogwarts staff expressing doubts about policies they've been expected to enforce without question. Emmeline leaned forward. You've given people permission to voice suspicions they've carried for years. But what can we actually do about it? Harry asked. He's still the most powerful wizard in Britain. He still controls Hogwarts, still has influence throughout the Ministry. We do what your mother would have done, Moody said firmly. We gather evidence, we build alliances, and we expose the truth publicly in a way that can't be ignored or suppressed. His magical eye focused on Harry with uncomfortable intensity. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes after. What comes after? War, Emmeline said simply. Not with wands and curses, political war. Dumbledore won't step down quietly, and his supporters won't abandon him easily. If we succeed in exposing his methods, it will split the wizarding world down the middle. Harry thought about Sirius, rotting in Azkaban. He thought about the Longbottoms, driven to madness while Dumbledore consolidated power. He thought about all the children who might be suffering under the adults who claimed to know what was best for them. Then we'd better make sure we win, Harry said quietly. Moody's scarred face split into a fierce grin. Spoken like a true marauder's son. All right, Potter, if you're committed to this path, then let's talk strategy. Because if we're going to take down Albus Dumbledore, we're going to need more than good intentions and righteous anger. As the 3 of them began planning in earnest, Harry felt something shift inside him. He was no longer just a boy seeking justice for his godfather. He was becoming something more dangerous, a catalyst for change in a world that had grown comfortable with its own corruption. And for the first time since reading his mother's letter, he felt ready for whatever came next. Chapter 7. Confronting the Giant. Harry stood outside Hagrid's hut for nearly 10 minutes before he found the courage to knock. The late August afternoon was warm and golden, with the kind of peaceful atmosphere that made it hard to believe he was about to potentially destroy one of the few genuine friendships he'd ever known. But the events of the past weeks had taught him that sometimes the hardest conversations were the most necessary ones. Through the window, he could see Hagrid's massive form hunched over his kitchen table, apparently grading some kind of paperwork. Fang, the enormous boarhound, was sprawled across most of the floor, snoring contentedly in a patch of sunlight. It was such a picture of domestic tranquility that Harry almost turned around and walked away. But then he thought about Sirius, alone in Azkaban for crimes he didn't commit. He thought about his mother's warnings about trusting carefully. And he thought about what Moody had said about people being manipulated into silence by their own loyalty. Hagrid deserved to know the truth. More than that, Harry needed to know if their friendship was strong enough to survive it. He knocked. "Come in," Hagrid's booming voice called from inside. "Doors open." Harry pushed inside to find Hagrid beaming at him with the uncomplicated joy that had characterized all their interactions since that night in the hut on the rock. And Fang raised his massive head long enough to give Harry an assessing look, then went back to his nap with a contented sigh, "Harry, good to see you. How are the school preparations going? Got all your books, cauldron, everything on the list?" Hagrid was already bustling toward the kettle, his movements making the small hut feel even smaller. Sit down. I'll make us some tea." "Actually, Hagrid," Harry said quietly, settling into the chair that had been enlarged to accommodate normal-sized visitors. "I wanted to talk to you about something important. About Dumbledore." Hagrid's hand paused over the tea caddy, and when he turned around, his expression had shifted from joy to concern. "What about Professor Dumbledore? He hasn't done anything to upset you, has he? And because I'm sure whatever it was, he's done quite a lot to upset me, actually," Harry said, pulling his mother's letter from his jacket pocket. "But I don't think he meant for me to find out about it." The sight of the cream-coloured parchment made Hagrid frown. "What's that, then?" "A letter from my mother. She left it for me in the Potter vault at Gringotts, sealed to open on my 11th birthday." Harry smoothed the letter carefully on the scarred wooden table between them. "She had some things to tell me about Professor Dumbledore that I think you need to hear." Hagrid's expression grew troubled, but he settled into his own oversized chair and leaned forward to listen. "Go on, then." Harry began to read aloud, his voice steady despite the way his hands shook slightly. He read his mother's concerns about Dumbledore's methods, or her discomfort with his talk of necessary sacrifices and acceptable losses. He read the list of people she trusted, including Sirius Black, and her explicit warning about Peter Pettigrew. When he finished, the silence in the small hut was deafening. "That's—" Hagrid started, then stopped, his massive hands clenching and unclenching in his lap. "That's not—" "Harry, your mother was under a lot of stress. People say things when they're frightened that they don't really mean. She wasn't just frightened, Hagrid. She was right." Harry pulled out another piece of parchment, notes he'd made from his conversations with Remus, Kingsley, and the others. "Sirius Black never received a trial. There are no records of him being questioned under Veritaserum. Peter Pettigrew was never officially declared dead. And Dumbledore provided testimony that helped put Sirius in Azkaban without due process." Hagrid's face went pale beneath his tangled beard. No, that's not right. Professor Dumbledore wouldn't— He's a great man, Harry. He's the greatest wizard alive. He saved the wizarding world." "Did he?" Harry asked gently. "Or did a lot of other people save the wizarding world while he made sure he got the credit for it?" "That's not fair," Hagrid said, his voice rising. "You don't know what it was like during the war. You don't know the kinds of decisions he had to make, the sacrifices." "What sacrifices, Hagrid?" Harry interrupted. "Because, from what I can tell, most of the sacrificing was done by other people. My parents died while Dumbledore was safely at Hogwarts. Sirius rotted in prison while Dumbledore built his reputation. The Longbottoms were tortured into madness while Dumbledore consolidated his power. The Longbottoms," Hagrid's voice cracked. "What do you mean about the Longbottoms?" Harry explained what Moody had told him about the suspicious timing of their attack, about how convenient it was that 2 Order members who questioned Dumbledore's methods were eliminated just as the war ended. He watched Hagrid's face crumple with each new revelation, saw the moment when blind faith began to crack under the weight of uncomfortable facts. "But he gave me a chance," Hagrid whispered. "When I was expelled, when everyone else wanted to send me away, he let me stay. He gave me a home, a job, a purpose. He believed in me when no one else would. And in return, he expected your absolute loyalty," Harry said quietly. "Even when that loyalty meant doing things that hurt other people. Even when it meant lying to an 11-year-old boy about his own history." Hagrid's beetle-black eyes filled with tears. "What do you mean?" "I mean that sending you to fetch me from the Dursleys wasn't just about convenience, was it? You were specifically chosen because you're loyal to Dumbledore, because you wouldn't ask awkward questions, because you'd present the version of events that he wanted me to hear." Harry leaned forward, his voice gentle but relentless. Tell me the truth, Hagrid. When you came to get me, what exactly were you told to say?" For a long moment, Hagrid stared down at his massive hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. He said to tell you that your parents were murdered by you-know-who, and that Sirius Black betrayed them. That you were famous for surviving, for defeating him. He looked up with anguished eyes. He said not to mention that Sirius was your godfather. Said it would only confuse you and make you sad. What else? He said to make sure ye understood how grateful ye should be to have a place at Hogwarts, to have his protection. He said to emphasize how dangerous the wizarding world could be without proper guidance. Hagrid's voice broke entirely. "Oh, Harry, I thought I was helping you. I thought I was protecting you." "You were trying to," Harry said firmly. "But you were being used, just like everyone else who cared about me was being used. The difference is that now you know." They sat in silence for several minutes. The only sound Fang's continued snoring and the distant chirping of birds outside. Harry watched emotions play across Hagrid's face. Grief, anger, betrayal, and underneath it all, a bone-deep weariness that spoke of a worldview crumbling in real time. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Hagrid asked finally. "He's still me, employer. He's still the headmaster. And despite everything you've told me, he did save me, Harry. He did give me a life when I had nothing." "I'm not asking you to hate him," Harry said carefully. "I'm not even asking you to oppose him. I'm just asking you not to help him manipulate me anymore. And maybe to think about whether the debt you owe him is worth more than doing what's right." Hagrid was quiet for a long time, or staring into the cold fireplace as if it might contain answers to questions he'd never thought to ask. "He used to say that some information was too dangerous for certain people to know," he said slowly. "That keeping secrets was sometimes kinder than telling hard truths. I believed him. And now? Now I think maybe he was talking about information that was dangerous to him, not to the people he was keeping it from." Hagrid looked up with something that might have been resolve beginning to replace the anguish in his eyes. "Your mum was a smart woman, Harry. If she said to be careful of him, if she thought he was manipulating people, maybe I should have listened to those doubts I had, but never wanted to admit." "What doubts?" "Little things. Like how he always seemed to know more about what was happening than he let on, but never quite enough to prevent the worst outcomes. Like how the people who asked too many questions had a habit of ending up on the most dangerous missions. Like how he never seemed to grieve the way the rest of us did when someone died." Hagrid shook his head slowly. "I told myself I was being ungrateful, that a man like me had no right to question a man like him. Everyone has the right to question authority, Hagrid, especially when that authority is making decisions that affect people's lives. Is that what you're doing, then? Questioning authority?" Harry thought about Sirius in Azkaban, about his own years in the cupboard under the stairs, about all the children who might be suffering while adults made decisions for their own good. "I'm trying to make sure that the people who control other people's lives are worthy of that responsibility." Hagrid studied him for a long moment, and when he smiled, it was sad, but genuine. "You sound just like your mother when you say things like that." She used to get that same look in her eyes when she thought someone was being treated unfairly. "Will you help me?" Harry asked. "Will you help me make sure Sirius gets the justice he deserves?" "I don't know how much help I can be," Hagrid said honestly. "I'm not clever like you, or brave like your parents. And I still owe Professor Dumbledore more than I can ever repay, even knowing what I know now." "I'm not asking you to betray him," Harry said quietly. "I'm just asking you to remember that your first loyalty should be to what's right, or not to who gave you a job." Hagrid nodded slowly. "I can try to do that. And Harry, I won't tell him about any of this. Whatever ye need to do, whatever plans ye have, I won't be the one to warn him." It wasn't everything Harry had hoped for, but it was enough. More than that, it was honest, and honesty was something he'd learned to value more than blind loyalty. "Thank you," Harry said simply. "Don't thank me yet," Hagrid replied, echoing Moody's words from days earlier. "I've got a lot to think about, and I'm not sure I like where me thoughts are leading me." As Harry prepared to leave, Hagrid caught his arm with one massive hand. "Harry, whatever happens with Professor Dumbledore, whatever you find out, or whatever you decide to do about it, it doesn't change how I feel about you. You're like the son I never had, and nothing's going to change that." Harry felt his throat close up with emotion. "You're the closest thing to family I've had since my parents died, Hagrid. Nothing's going to change that either." As he walked back toward the castle grounds, Harry felt the weight of another relationship tested and strengthened by truth. Hagrid might not be able to actively help him, but he wouldn't actively hinder him either. And in a world where so many adults seemed determined to control his choices, having one who was willing to step back and let him choose for himself felt like a victory. Behind him, warm light still glowed from the windows of Hagrid's hut, and Harry could almost imagine the gentle giant sitting at his table, staring at the letter that had shattered his certainties, and wondering what other truths he'd been blind to all these years. Sometimes the hardest conversations were indeed the most necessary ones, and sometimes, Harry was learning, friendship was strong enough to survive even the most devastating revelations. Chapter 8. The Breakout. The emergency session of the Wizengamot was called for dawn on August 28, 1991, 3 days before the Hogwarts Express was scheduled to depart from King's Cross Station. Harry learned about it from a terse note delivered by Goblin Courier at 5:30 in the morning, while the Dursleys were still asleep and blissfully unaware that their nephew was about to become the centre of the biggest political scandal in recent wizarding history. The note was from Amelia Bones. "It's happening today. To be ready." Harry dressed quickly and slipped out of Privet Drive while the sky was still grey with pre-dawn light. He had told the Dursleys he would be spending the day in London with Hagrid, finalising his school preparations, a lie that felt both necessary and oddly liberating. Soon he hoped he wouldn't need to lie to anyone about anything ever again. The journey to the ministry felt both endless and impossibly brief. Harry's heart hammered against his ribs as the visitor's lift descended into the bowels of the building, carrying him toward level 10 and the courtrooms where wizarding justice was supposed to be dispensed. Remus was waiting for him outside courtroom 10, looking pale but determined. "Are you ready for this?" Remus asked quietly as they approached the heavy wooden doors. "I've been ready since I found my mother's letter," Harry replied, and was surprised to find that he meant it. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Harry recognized some faces from newspaper photographs, ministry officials, prominent wizarding families, members of the press with their quick quotes quills poised eagerly above parchment. The air hummed with anticipation and whispered speculation. At the front of the room, Amelia Bones stood behind a podium thick with legal documents, her expression grim and professional. "The emergency session of the Wizengamot will come to order," announced Cornelius Fudge from the High Judge's bench, though his voice lacked its usual pompous confidence. "We are here to review new evidence regarding the case of Sirius Black, convicted in absentia of treason, murder, and conspiracy in 1981. Harry took his seat in the witness gallery, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. Somewhere in this room was Albus Dumbledore, though Harry couldn't see him from where he sat. He could feel the man's presence, though, a kind of watchful pressure that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Madam Bones," Fudge continued, "you have requested this emergency review. Please present your evidence." Amelia Bones stood, her voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. "Honoured members of the Wizengamot, I come before you today to present evidence of a grave miscarriage of justice that has persisted for nearly 11 years. Evidence that calls into question not only the conviction of Sirius Black, but the very procedures by which that conviction was obtained. She began methodically, presenting each piece of evidence with the careful precision of a prosecutor who knew her case was unassailable. The lack of trial records, the absence of veritaserum testimony, the unexplained failure to investigate Peter Pettigrew's apparent death, the convenient timing of emergency powers that had expired the moment Voldemort fell. Furthermore, Bones continued, producing a thick folder of documents. We have evidence that certain influential figures actively discouraged proper investigation procedures and expedited Mr. Black's transfer to Azkaban without due process. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Harry saw several Wizengamot members lean forward in their seats, their expressions ranging from shocked to angry. "These are serious allegations, Madam Bones," said a witch with silver hair and stern features. "Do you have testimony to support these claims?" "I do." Bones gestured toward the witness stand. "I call Remus Lupin to testify about the events surrounding the betrayal of James and Lily Potter." Harry watched as Remus walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity, his shabby robes and prematurely greying hair making him look older than his 31 years. When he spoke, his voice was steady but heavy with years of suppressed guilt. "I was a close friend of both James Potter and Sirius Black," Remus began. "I knew them at Hogwarts, fought alongside them in the Order of the Phoenix, and was present for many of the discussions surrounding the Fidelius charm that was meant to protect the Potter family." He testified about Dumbledore's suggestion that Peter Pettigrew serve as secret keeper, or about Lily's growing unease with the arrangement, about the suspicious speed with which Sirius was imprisoned after his arrest. The courtroom was silent as he spoke, hanging on every word. "Did anyone attempt to verify Sirius Black's claims about his role as secret keeper?" asked the silver-haired witch. "No," Remus said quietly. His arrest was presented as a foregone conclusion. Those of us who might have questioned it were discouraged from doing so. "By whom?" Remus's eyes found Harry's across the courtroom. "By Albus Dumbledore, among others. We were told that the evidence was overwhelming and that questioning it would only prolong everyone's suffering." The murmur that ran through the courtroom this time was louder, more agitated. Harry could see reporters scribbling frantically, or their quick quotes quills smoking with the speed of their writing. "I call Kingsley Shacklebolt," Bones announced. Kingsley's testimony was more technical, but equally damaging. He presented a detailed analysis of the investigation records, pointing out the glaring procedural violations and unexplained omissions. He testified about the lack of magical analysis at the scene of Peter Pettigrew's supposed death, the failure to follow up on inconsistencies in witness statements, the rushed nature of decisions that should have taken weeks of careful review. "In your professional opinion as a senior Auror," asked another Wizengamot member, "were proper investigative procedures followed in this case?" "No, sir," Kingsley said firmly. "Based on the evidence, or rather, the lack of evidence, presented here today, I would not have authorized an arrest warrant, let alone a conviction and life sentence." The courtroom erupted in voices, shocked, angry, demanding. Fudge had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. "The evidence presented today is indeed troubling," Fudge said, his face pale and sweating. "However, before we can take any action regarding Mr. Black's conviction, we must—" "Actually," interrupted a new voice from the back of the courtroom, "I believe we can take immediate action." All heads turned to see a goblin in formal banking robes standing at the rear entrance, flanked by two heavily armed goblin guards. Harry recognized Griphook's sharp features and intelligent dark eyes. "Who dares interrupt these proceedings?" Fudge demanded. "Griphook of Gringotts, representing the financial interests of one Harry James Potter," the goblin replied calmly. "I have documents that I believe this court will find relevant to the case at hand." Griphook approached the bench with the measured pace of someone who knew his rights under both wizard and goblin law. He produced a scroll sealed with green wax and the Potter family seal. This is the last will and testament of James Potter, sealed in the Potter family vault and verified by goblin magic to be authentic and unaltered, Griphook announced. In it, Mr. Potter explicitly names Sirius Black as the chosen guardian for his son, Harry, in the event of his and his wife's deaths. He also explicitly states that under no circumstances should Harry be placed with Lily Potter's sister and her family. The silence that followed was deafening. Harry felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him, not because the revelation was surprising, but because of its implications. His father had specifically chosen Sirius as his guardian, had specifically rejected the Dursleys as an option. Furthermore, Griphook continued, this will was presented to the relevant ministry departments in 1981 and was summarily dismissed on the grounds that the named guardian was a convicted criminal. However, if that conviction was obtained improperly, then Harry Potter has been illegally separated from his rightful guardian for 11 years, finished the silver-haired witch, her voice sharp with outrage. Fudge looked as though he might faint. This is highly irregular. We cannot simply— We can and we will, declared another Wizengamot member, rising to his feet. As I move for an immediate vote to overturn the conviction of Sirius Black and authorize his immediate release from Azkaban, pending a full investigation of the circumstances surrounding his imprisonment. Seconded. Thirded. The vote was swift and decisive. 47 in favor, 3 opposed, 2 abstentions. Harry felt tears streaming down his face before he realized he was crying. The motion carries, Fudge announced in a strangled voice. The conviction of Sirius Black is hereby overturned. Aurors will be dispatched immediately to secure his release from Azkaban. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters rushed for the exits, desperate to be first with the story. Ministry officials huddled in urgent conversation. Through it all, Harry sat frozen in his seat, hardly daring to believe that it was finally happening. Sirius was going to be free. The reunion took place 3 days later at Gringotts, in the same private chamber where Harry had first learned the truth about his inheritance. Harry had wanted neutral ground for their first meeting, somewhere away from the media circus that had engulfed the wizarding world since news of Sirius's release broke. The man who walked into the chamber bore little resemblance to the laughing teenager in the photographs Harry had seen. Sirius Black was gaunt and hollow-cheeked, his once handsome features sharpened by years of malnutrition and despair. His dark hair hung lank and unkempt past his shoulders, and his eyes held shadows that spoke of things no human should have to endure. But when those eyes fell on Harry, they filled with such joy and wonder that Harry forgot to breathe. "James," Sirius whispered, reaching out with a trembling hand. No, you're too young. I'm Harry," Harry said, standing slowly. "I'm your godson." The sound Sirius made was part sob, part laugh, part something too raw for words. He crossed the room in 2 quick strides and pulled Harry into a fierce embrace that smelled of sea salt and freedom and something indefinably warm that might have been coming home. "Harry," Sirius murmured against his hair. "Oh, Harry, you're so big, so grown up. I've missed 11 years of your life, and I can never get them back." "It's not your fault," Harry said, his own voice thick with tears. "None of it was your fault." They held each other for a long time, 2 people reclaiming a relationship that had been stolen from them by betrayal and systematic injustice. When they finally pulled apart, Sirius kept his hands on Harry's shoulders, as if afraid he might disappear. "Tell me everything," Sirius said. "Tell me about your life, about the Dursleys, about how you figured out the truth. Tell me how my brilliant godson managed to accomplish what the entire wizarding justice system couldn't." So Harry told him, about finding Lily's letter, about the meetings with Remus and the others, about the careful investigation that had revealed the scope of Dumbledore's manipulation. Sirius listened with growing amazement and pride, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just absorbing the fact that the baby he'd held 11 years ago had grown into someone capable of orchestrating his own liberation. "Your parents would be so proud," Sirius said, when Harry finished. "Not just of what you accomplished, but of who you've become. You chose truth over comfort, justice over easy answers. That takes courage most adults never develop." "I had help," Harry said. "Good people who were willing to risk things to do what was right. That's leadership, Harry. Getting good people to work together toward a common goal." Sirius's smile was the first fully happy expression Harry had seen from him. "I formally claim guardianship rights over you, by the way, assuming that's what you want." "More than anything," Harry said without hesitation. "Good, because we have a visitor coming, and I think it would be better if you had legal protection when he arrives." As if summoned by Sirius's words, the chamber door opened to reveal Albus Dumbledore. The headmaster looked exactly as he always did, serene, grandfatherly, completely unruffled by recent events. But there was something in his blue eyes that Harry had never noticed before, a calculating coldness that made him instinctively step closer to Sirius. "Sirius," Dumbledore said, with what sounded like genuine warmth. "I cannot tell you how relieved I am to see you free. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding." "Has it?" Sirius asked mildly. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a very deliberate series of choices that kept an innocent man in prison and a child away from his rightful guardian." "I understand you're angry." "I'm not angry, Albus," Sirius interrupted, and the quiet menace in his voice made Harry's breath catch. "I'm furious, but more than that, I'm disappointed. I trusted you once. We all did. And you used that trust to manipulate us into compliance while you played chess with our lives." Dumbledore's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I did what I thought was best for everyone involved, including Harry. The blood protections provided by his aunt's home are irrelevant now," Harry said quietly, finding his voice at last, "because I won't be going back there. Ever." For the first time since entering the chamber, Dumbledore looked directly at Harry. The weight of that gaze was immense, compelling, almost hypnotic in its intensity. "Harry, my dear boy," Dumbledore said, his voice warm with grandfatherly concern, "I understand that recent revelations have been confusing and painful, but you must understand that everything I did was to protect you. The Dursleys were the safest place for you to grow up, even if they weren't the most loving." "Safe from what?" Harry asked. "From Death Eaters who were all dead or imprisoned? From a Dark Lord who was gone? Or safe from people who might have taught me to think for myself instead of accepting whatever I was told?" Dumbledore's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. "There are threats in this world that you cannot imagine, Harry. Dangers that require careful preparation and guidance to overcome. Your destiny, my destiny, is my own to choose," Harry said firmly. "You don't get to decide what my life should be worth, or who I should trust, or what sacrifices I should make for your greater good." The silence that followed was charged with tension, as Dumbledore studied Harry with the intensity of a chess player whose opponent had just made an unexpected move. "I see," Dumbledore said, finally. "You have grown quite independent in a very short time. I hope, for everyone's sake, that you have also grown wise enough to recognize when you are out of your depth." It wasn't quite a threat, but it wasn't not a threat either. Sirius stepped protectively in front of Harry, his body language screaming danger despite his weakened state. "He won't be alone in those waters, Albus," Sirius said quietly. "He has a godfather now, and allies, and people who will make sure he never has to face anything without support again." Dumbledore nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a move in some vast game that only he fully understood. "Very well, but remember, both of you, choices have consequences, and some consequences are more far-reaching than others." With that cryptic warning, he turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving Harry and Sirius alone with the knowledge that while they had won this battle, the war for Harry's future was far from over. But for the first time in his life, Harry wasn't facing that future alone. Chapter 9. The Headmaster's Gambit. The second confrontation came the next morning, and this time Dumbledore was not alone. Harry was in the secure conference room at Gringotts, reviewing guardianship paperwork with Sirius and Griphook, when the heavy bronze doors burst open without ceremony. Dumbledore strode in, flanked by Cornelius Fudge and 2 Aurors. Harry didn't recognize his usually serene expression replaced by something that might have been desperation, carefully disguised as righteous authority. "Oh, this has gone quite far enough," Dumbledore announced without preamble, his blue eyes blazing with an intensity that made the air itself seem to crackle. "Harry, you will return to your aunt and uncle's home immediately. The protections there are not merely conveniences. They are necessities that could mean the difference between your life and death." Sirius rose slowly from his chair, 11 years of Azkaban having left him gaunt, but not diminished. "And good morning to you too, Albus. I don't recall inviting you to this private family meeting." "Family?" Fudge squeaked, mopping his brow with a handkerchief, despite the cool morning air. "Surely you can't be serious about taking custody of the boy. You've just been released from prison, Black. You have no home, no income, or no means of providing proper care." "He has the entire Black family fortune," Griphook interrupted smoothly, producing another scroll from his seemingly endless supply of legal documents. "Recently verified and restored to his access upon the overturning of his conviction. Mr. Black is, financially speaking, one of the wealthiest men in Britain." Fudge's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. Harry might have found it amusing, if not for the way Dumbledore was studying him with that unsettling intensity. "Financial resources are irrelevant," Dumbledore said quietly, never taking his eyes off Harry. "Harry's safety depends on very specific magical protections that can only be maintained at his mother's blood relative's home. Without those protections, he becomes vulnerable to enemies who have not forgotten their desire for revenge." "What enemies?" Sirius demanded. "Voldemort is gone. His inner circle is dead or imprisoned. Who exactly is threatening an 11-year-old boy?" "Tom Riddle is not gone," Dumbledore said, and something in his tone made everyone in the room go very still. "Diminished, yes. Weakened, certainly. But not gone. And there are others. Followers who escaped justice, families who blame Harry for their losses, dark wizards who would see immense value in capturing or corrupting the boy who lived." Harry felt a chill run down his spine. "You're saying Voldemort is still alive?" In a manner of speaking, Dumbledore's gaze intensified, becoming almost hypnotic. "Which is why you must understand, Harry, that your safety, indeed, your very survival, depends on returning to Little Whinging. The blood protection your mother's sacrifice created can only be maintained while you call your aunt's house home." Before Harry could respond, Remus Lupin stepped through the open doorway, followed by Kingsley Shacklebolt, Amelia Bones, and, to Harry's surprise, Alastor Moody, his magical eye spinning wildly as it surveyed the room for threats. "Ah," Dumbledore said with a slight smile, "I see Harry has gathered quite the collection of advisers. How ambitious of him." "More like necessary," Moody growled, his scarred face twisted into its habitual scowl. "When children need protection from the adults who claim to have their best interests at heart." "Alastor," Dumbledore said, his voice carrying wounded disappointment. "Surely you, of all people, will understand the importance of difficult decisions made for the greater good. You've made such decisions yourself, in your years fighting dark wizards." I have," Moody replied grimly, "and I've regretted every single one. The difference is, I made those decisions about my own life, not about some child's future without his knowledge or consent." Dumbledore turned his attention back to Harry, and this time there was something almost pleading in his expression. "Harry, my boy, I know this is difficult to understand. I know recent events have made you question my judgment. But you must trust that everything I have done has been to prepare you for the trials that lie ahead." "What trials?" Harry asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "The prophecy," Dumbledore said simply, as if those two words explained everything. "The prophecy that marked you as Voldemort's equal, that bound your fates together in ways that cannot be undone. You are not just any wizard, Harry. You are the only one who can truly defeat Tom Riddle when he returns to full power." The silence that followed was deafening. Harry felt the weight of every eye in the room, but none more heavily than Dumbledore's piercing blue gaze. "A prophecy," Harry said slowly. "One that says I have to fight Voldemort." "One that says you are the only one who can defeat him," Dumbledore corrected gently. "But that victory comes at a price, Harry. It requires preparation, sacrifice, and above all, the protection that can only be maintained through your connection to your mother's blood." "And what if I don't want to be part of your prophecy?" Harry asked, his voice steady despite the churning in his stomach. "What if I choose not to fight him?" For a moment, Dumbledore's mask of grandfatherly concern slipped entirely, revealing something calculating and cold beneath. "I'm afraid that choice is not yours to make, my boy. The connection between you and Tom was forged the night he tried to kill you. You carry a piece of his soul within you." "Albus!" Sirius's voice cracked like a whip. "What did you just say?" Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly, as if realizing he had revealed more than he intended. The magical connection created that night is complex. Harry carries within him a fragment of Voldemort's power, a piece of his very essence. It is what gives him his ability to speak Parseltongue, what creates the mental link between them, and what ultimately makes him the only one capable of destroying Voldemort completely. The room erupted in shocked voices, but Harry heard none of them. He was staring at Dumbledore with a growing sense of horror as the implications became clear. "You're saying I have part of Voldemort inside me," Harry said quietly. "A very small part," Dumbledore said quickly. "A fragment of his soul that attached itself to yours when his killing curse rebounded. It does not make you evil, Harry. It simply makes you necessary." "Necessary for what?" Sirius demanded, his voice deadly quiet. Dumbledore hesitated, and in that hesitation, Harry saw the truth. "For me to die," Harry said, with sudden, terrible clarity. "That's what you're not saying. The piece of his soul in me. It has to be destroyed. Oh, and the only way to destroy it is—" "No," Sirius said fiercely. "No, absolutely not. I don't care what prophecy you think you're following, Albus. I won't let you turn my godson into a sacrificial lamb for your greater good." "The greater good requires—" Dumbledore began. "The greater good," Amelia Bones interrupted, her voice sharp with anger, "seems to require an awful lot of other people's deaths, doesn't it, Albus? James and Lily Potter, Frank and Alice Longbottom. How many others were acceptable losses in your grand design?" "You do not understand the complexities." "I understand perfectly," Kingsley said, stepping forward. "You've been planning Harry's death since the night his parents died. Every decision you've made, every placement, every manipulation, it was all to make sure he'd be willing to die when you decided the time was right." Dumbledore drew himself up to his full height, and for a moment the mild-mannered headmaster disappeared entirely, replaced by one of the most powerful wizards in the world. "You think this brings me joy? You think I want to see Harry die? I have spent 11 years trying to find another way, any other way. But the prophecy is clear. Neither can live while the other survives. And if Harry is not prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice when the time comes, then everyone he cares about will die instead." "Then we'll find another way," Remus said firmly. "We'll research, we'll experiment, we'll consult every expert in Britain if we have to. But we will not accept that Harry has to die. And what if your research fails?" Dumbledore asked. "What if there truly is no other way? Will you tell Harry's friends, his future wife, his children that they died because you were too squeamish to accept necessity?" "His future wife?" Harry asked, his voice cracking slightly. "You've planned out my entire life, haven't you? Who I'll marry, when I'll die. Probably how many children I should have first, to carry on the bloodline." Dumbledore's silence was answer enough. "Get out," Sirius said quietly. "Sirius, please." "Get out," Sirius roared, and for a moment Harry could see the wild, desperate man who had spent 11 years in Azkaban, wrongfully imprisoned. "Get out of this room. Get away from my godson. And don't come back unless you're prepared to treat him like a human being, instead of a weapon you're sharpening for your own purposes." Dumbledore looked around the room, taking in the united front of adults who had once trusted him implicitly. "You are making a mistake," he said quietly. "Without my protection, without the careful preparations I have made, Harry will not survive what is coming." "Then we'll protect him ourselves," Moody growled. "Through proper channels, with proper oversight, and with his informed consent. Novel concepts, I know." "Very well," Dumbledore said, and something in his tone made Harry's blood run cold. "But remember, all of you, that when Tom Riddle returns, and he will return, he will come for Harry first. And when he does, you will discover just how inadequate your protection truly is." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Harry will still attend Hogwarts, of course. His magical education is far too important to be left to chance. But I hope, for everyone's sake, that he proves more amenable to guidance once he experiences the realities of the wizarding world firsthand." After he left, the room remained silent for a long moment. Harry felt numb, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd learned. His entire life had been orchestrated around his eventual death. Every adult who claimed to care about him had been working toward the moment when they would ask him to die for the greater good. Except for the people in this room. "We'll find another way," Remus said again, his voice firm with conviction. "I don't care what prophecy says, and I don't care what Dumbledore believes is necessary. We will find another way." "And until we do," Sirius said, pulling Harry into a fierce embrace, "you are not alone in this. You have family now, and allies, and people who will fight for your right to choose your own future." Harry buried his face against Sirius's shoulder and let himself believe, for just a moment, that it might actually be true. Outside the secure walls of Gringotts, the wizarding world continued its daily business, unaware that the boy who lived had just declared his independence from the man who had shaped his destiny from birth. But inside that bronze-walled chamber, surrounded by people who valued his life over their cause, Harry Potter began to plan for a future that was truly his own. Chapter 10. Preparing for War. Grimmauld Place had not been kind to the years of abandonment. When Sirius pushed open the heavy front door for the first time in over a decade, the smell of decay and neglect rolled out like a physical wave, making Harry's eyes water and his stomach clench. Dust particles danced in the weak sunlight that managed to penetrate the grimy windows, and somewhere in the darkness beyond, something scuttled away from the light with a sound like claws on wood. "Home, sweet home," Sirius said with bitter humor, his voice echoing in the cavernous hallway. "Welcome to the noble and most ancient house of Black, Harry. Try not to touch anything until we've had a chance to check it for curses." The next 3 days passed in a blur of cleaning, warding, and intensive magical education that left Harry's head spinning and his wand hand aching. Grimmauld Place was transformed from a mouldering monument to pure-blood supremacy into something resembling a war room, with maps of Britain spread across the dining table, communication mirrors positioned throughout the house, and enough defensive texts to stock a small library. "Again," Remus said patiently, watching Harry attempt the shield charm for the 10th time that morning. "Remember, it's not just about the wand movement. You need to feel the magic flowing through you, Visualize the barrier forming between you and the threat. Harry gritted his teeth and tried once more, pouring his frustration and determination into the spell. This time, the silvery shield that appeared was solid and strong, but easily deflecting the practice hex that Sirius sent his way. "Better," Sirius said with approval. "Your magical core is strong, Harry. Stronger than most adults, actually. It's just a matter of training your focus and your instincts." "How long do we have?" Harry asked, lowering his wand and wiping sweat from his forehead. The intensive training was exhausting, but he could feel himself improving with each session. "Until the Hogwarts Express leaves on September 1st, Remus replied. 4 days to give you the basics of defensive magic, mental shielding, and escape procedures. It's not enough time to make you an expert, but it should be enough to keep you alive if things go badly." "When things go badly," Moody corrected from the doorway, his magical eye spinning to survey the room before fixing on Harry. "What Dumbledore's not done with you, Potter. He's just regrouping, planning his next move. And when it comes, you need to be ready." Harry had grown accustomed to Moody's paranoid pronouncements over the past few days, but this one carried particular weight. The grizzled ex-aura had been teaching him to recognize manipulation tactics, mental intrusions, and the subtle signs that someone was trying to influence his thoughts or emotions. "Show me the mental shields again," Moody instructed, settling into the chair they'd transfigured for his wooden leg. "Remember, it's not about blocking everything out. That's impossible for someone your age. It's about recognizing when someone's poking around in your head and making it bloody difficult for them to find what they're looking for." Harry closed his eyes and tried to visualize his mind as Moody had taught him, not as an empty space, but as a house with many rooms, some public and some private. The trick was learning to guide intruders toward the rooms he wanted them to see while keeping the important stuff locked away. "Good," Moody grunted after a moment. "Better than yesterday. Keep practicing that. Dumbledore's particularly skilled at making people think his suggestions are their own ideas." A sharp knock at the front door interrupted the lesson. Sirius tensed, his hand moving instinctively to his wand, but Remus just smiled. "That'll be Kingsley," he said. "He said he'd stop by this afternoon with news from the Ministry." Kingsley Shacklebolt looked tired when he entered the sitting room, his usually immaculate appearance slightly rumpled around the edges. He accepted the cup of tea Remus offered with grateful hands and settled into one of the worn armchairs with a sigh. "How bad is it?" Sirius asked without preamble. "Mixed," Kingsley replied honestly. "The public reaction to Harry's situation has been largely supportive. People are horrified by the idea of a child being manipulated and controlled without his knowledge. The Prophet's been running stories about ministerial oversight and the importance of protecting orphaned heirs from exploitation." "But," Harry prompted, sensing there was more. "But Dumbledore still has considerable influence, and he's been using it," Kingsley said grimly. "He's been meeting privately with ministry officials, Hogwarts governors, and influential families. His message is consistent. Harry has been influenced by well-meaning but misguided adults who don't understand the larger threats he faces." "He's painting us as the manipulators," Remus said, with bitter understanding. "Exactly. And some people are buying it." Kingsley pulled out a folder thick with parchment. "I've been monitoring communications, and the wizarding community is split. About half think Harry deserves the right to choose his own guardian and future. The other half think he's a child who should trust the wisdom of the man who defeated Grindelwald." Harry felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in his stomach. What about Hogwarts? What will other students? "That's actually the more complicated issue," Kingsley said, sorting through his papers. "I've been in contact with several families who have children your age. Some are supportive. The Bones family, for instance, thinks you're brave for standing up for yourself. But others—" He paused, selecting a particular letter. "This is from Augusta Longbottom, Neville's grandmother. She's concerned that associating with you might put her grandson at risk if Dumbledore decides to retaliate against your allies." The words hit Harry harder than any curse could have. The idea that his fight for independence might hurt other children made him feel sick. "It's not your fault," Sirius said firmly, apparently reading Harry's expression. "Dumbledore is the one creating an atmosphere where people are afraid to do what's right." "But they're still afraid," Harry said quietly. "And if I go to Hogwarts, won't I just be putting other students in the middle of our conflict?" "That depends on how you handle it," Moody said, his scarred face serious. "You could go in quietly, keep your head down, try to avoid confrontation. That would be the safe choice." "Or?" Harry asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Or you could go in with your eyes open, ready to protect other students from the same manipulation you escaped," Moody continued. "Use your position, your fame, your allies, to make sure no other child gets sacrificed for the greater good." The room was quiet for a moment, as Harry considered his options. The safe choice would be to focus on his own survival, or his own education, his own future. But every time he closed his eyes, he could see other children like Neville, whose parents had been convenient casualties of Dumbledore's war, being pushed into roles they never chose, carrying burdens they never agreed to bear. "I want to go," Harry said finally, "not just to learn magic, but to make sure other students know they have choices too. That they don't have to accept everything they're told just because it comes from an authority figure." Sirius's smile was fierce with pride. "That's very James of you," he said. "Your father never could resist a fight when someone was being bullied or manipulated." "And very Lily too," Remus added. "She always said that the most important magic was teaching people to think for themselves." "Then we'll need to prepare you properly," Kingsley said, pulling out another set of documents. "I've arranged for discreet ministry protection while you're at school. Auras who will be positioned in Hogsmeade and the surrounding area, ready to respond if things go badly. I've also established communication protocols that will allow you to contact us directly if you need help." He handed Harry a small, silver pendant shaped like a lightning bolt. "This is a modified Protean charm. If you're in immediate danger, touch it and think the word storm. It will alert all of us simultaneously and give us your exact location." "What about legal protection?" Sirius asked. "If Dumbledore tries to override my guardianship or force Harry into situations he's not comfortable with?" "Amelia's working on that," Kingsley replied. "She's drafting new ministry guidelines for the treatment of orphaned heirs, particularly those who've been placed without proper oversight. It won't change what happened to you, but it should prevent similar situations in the future." Over the next 2 days, Harry threw himself into preparation with single-minded determination. He practiced defensive spells until his magic felt as natural as breathing. He studied Potter family history, learning about ancestors who had fought against corrupt authority and protected the powerless. He read everything he could find about recognizing and resisting mental manipulation. Most importantly, he wrote letters. Dozens of them, to the families of his future classmates, to ministry officials, to anyone who might listen. But not angry screeds against Dumbledore. Sirius had counseled him that personal attacks would only make him look petty, but carefully crafted explanations of his position and his hopes for positive change. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Weasley," he wrote to one family, "I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to reach out personally to assure you that my recent actions regarding my guardianship were not taken lightly or without careful consideration. My goal is not to cause trouble at Hogwarts, but rather to ensure that all students, including your children, have the freedom to make their own choices about their magical education and their futures. I hope we can work together to create a school environment where young people are guided and supported, not controlled or manipulated. I look forward to meeting your son Ron and hopefully earning his friendship through my actions rather than my reputation." Some families didn't respond. Others sent polite but non-committal replies, but a few wrote back with genuine warmth and support, and those letters gave Harry hope that he wouldn't be completely alone at Hogwarts. On the evening before he was due to leave for school, Harry sat in the newly refurbished library at Grimmauld Place, surrounded by his allies and the evidence of everything they'd accomplished in just a few short weeks. Sirius was reading through legal documents, making notes for future challenges to Dumbledore's authority. Remus was grading practice tests Harry had taken on defensive magic theory. Moody was cleaning his wand with obsessive care while his magical eye kept watch on the windows and doors. "Nervous?" Kingsley asked, settling into the chair beside Harry's. "Terrified," Harry admitted. "Not of Dumbledore exactly, but of failing. Of not being strong enough or smart enough to protect other people the way all of you have protected me." "You're not responsible for protecting everyone," Kingsley said gently. "You're 11 years old, Harry. Your job is to learn and grow and become the person you want to be. If you can help a few other students along the way, that's wonderful. But don't put the weight of the world on your shoulders." "Someone has to," Harry said quietly. "If not me, then who?" Dumbledore's had decades to shape the wizarding world according to his vision. How many other children has he manipulated? How many other families has he broken up for the greater good? "Change takes time," Remus said, looking up from his grading. "You're not going to reform Hogwarts in your first year, but you can plant seeds, show other students that they have choices, that authority figures can be questioned, that their lives and futures matter. And you won't be alone," Sirius added firmly. "We'll be watching, waiting, ready to help whenever you need us. You have a family now, Harry, and family doesn't abandon each other." As Harry prepared for bed that night, he found himself thinking about his mother's letter, about her warning to be brave but smart, to trust carefully and love fiercely. Tomorrow he would board the Hogwarts Express, not as the boy who lived, the famous child who had defeated Voldemort through luck and his mother's sacrifice. He would board it as Harry Potter, not the boy who had chosen to fight for justice and truth, even when it meant standing against the most powerful wizard in Britain. It was a heavy burden for someone not yet 12 years old. But as he drifted off to sleep, in a house that was finally a home, surrounded by people who valued his life over their cause, Harry Potter felt ready to bear it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he belonged. Chapter 11. The Sorting Revelation. The Hogwarts Express had never carried a more unusual passenger than Harry Potter on September 1st, 1991. As the Scarlet steam engine pulled away from King's Cross Station, Harry sat in a compartment with a trunk full of defensive texts and communication mirrors, at a head full of strategic knowledge most adults never learned, and a heart heavy with the weight of responsibility he'd never asked for, but couldn't bring himself to abandon. The discreet protection Kingsley had arranged was invisible but reassuring. Harry had spotted at least 3 auras on the platform, disguised as ordinary wizards seeing their children off to school. More would be positioned in Hogsmeade and the surrounding areas, ready to respond if Dumbledore's retaliation proved more direct than expected. "Excuse me," said a voice from the compartment doorway. "Do you mind if I sit here? Everywhere else is full." Harry looked up to see a boy about his own age, with flaming red hair and a face full of freckles, holding what looked like a homemade sandwich and wearing robes that had clearly seen better days. This had to be Ron Weasley, one of the children whose family Harry had written to over the summer. "Of course," Harry said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "You're Ron, aren't you? Ron Weasley." Ron's eyes widened slightly. "Yeah, that's me. And you're Harry Potter. Blimey, you really do have the scar." He paused, looking uncomfortable. My mum got your letter. She said to tell you that any friend of Sirius Black's is welcome at the Burrow any time." The simple warmth of the statement made Harry's chest tight. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "Mum also said," Ron continued, settling into his seat, "that anyone brave enough to stand up to Dumbledore probably deserves to be heard out before being judged, though she also said I should make up my own mind about you, or not just go by what other people say. That's exactly what I'd want, Harry said honestly. I don't want friends who like me because I'm famous. I want friends who like me because of who I actually am. Ron studied him for a moment, then grinned. Well, who are you actually, then? It was such a simple question, but Harry found himself pausing to consider it seriously. A month ago, he would have said he was a freak who lived in a cupboard and made strange things happen. A week ago, he might have said he was the boy who lived, defined entirely by something that had happened to him as a baby. I'm someone who thinks people should get to choose their own futures, Harry said finally. Someone who believes children shouldn't be sacrificed for adults' idea of the greater good, or someone who wants to make sure no one else has to grow up the way I did. Blimey, Ron said again, but this time with obvious respect. That's actually really brilliant. Most people our age just want to pass their exams and play Quidditch. What about you? Harry asked. What do you want? Ron was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the countryside rushing past. I want to matter, he said eventually. I've got 5 older brothers who are all brilliant at something, and a little sister who's already showing more magical talent than I probably ever will. I want to do something that makes people remember Ron Weasley, not just one of the Weasley boys. Then maybe we can help each other, Harry said. I need friends who aren't impressed by my scar or my fame. You want to make a difference on your own merits, or seems like we might be good for each other. Their conversation was interrupted by another voice from the doorway, a girl with bushy brown hair and an expression of intense intelligence. Has anyone seen a toad? Neville's lost his, she said, then stopped short when she saw Harry. Oh, you're Harry Potter. I am, Harry said carefully. This would be Hermione Granger, the Muggle-born girl whose parents had sent a cautiously supportive letter after reading about his situation in the Prophet. And you're Hermione. Your parents wrote to me. They did, Hermione said, stepping into the compartment and closing the door behind her. They said they were proud that someone was finally asking whether the wizarding world's treatment of children meets basic ethical standards. She settled into the remaining seat with the confidence of someone who belonged wherever she chose to sit. They also said they hoped you weren't just a privileged child throwing a tantrum because you didn't like your guardians. Harry appreciated her directness. What do you think? I think, Hermione said slowly, that anyone who can organize a legal challenge that's sophisticated while maintaining public support probably has legitimate grievances. I also think that anyone who chooses to attend Hogwarts after publicly opposing Dumbledore is either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both, Ron said with a grin. Definitely both, Harry agreed. But I figure if I'm going to be foolish, and I might as well be foolish in service of something worthwhile. The rest of the journey passed quickly, filled with conversation that felt more honest and substantive than anything Harry had experienced with people his own age. Ron told stories about his family that revealed both their warmth and their struggles. Hermione shared her concerns about fitting into a world that was entirely new to her, and her determination to prove that Muggle-born witches belonged in magical society. By the time they reached Hogsmeade Station, Harry felt cautiously optimistic about his prospects for making real friends at Hogwarts. The boat ride across the lake was everything the books had promised, magical in the most literal sense, with the castle rising from the water like something out of a fairy tale. But Harry found himself studying the grounds with a strategist's eye, noting potential escape routes and wondering how many of the portraits they passed might report back to Dumbledore. The Great Hall was magnificent, its enchanted ceiling showing a star-filled sky that seemed to stretch into infinity. Harry felt a moment of genuine wonder at the sight, a reminder that magic could be beautiful and inspiring, as well as dangerous and manipulative. Professor McGonagall called the first years forward for sorting, her stern expression giving nothing away when her eyes met Harry's. but Harry thought he saw something like concern in her gaze, and maybe a touch of guilt. The sorting hat was smaller than Harry had expected, and more worn. It perched on its stool like a judgment waiting to be rendered, and when McGonagall began calling names, Harry felt his stomach clench with anticipation. Abbot Hannah was sorted into Hufflepuff. Boot Terry went to Ravenclaw. When Granger Hermione was called, she shot Harry an encouraging look before marching up to the stool with her chin held high. The hat deliberated for nearly 5 minutes before finally calling out, Gryffindor! Longbottom, Neville, was next, and Harry watched the round-faced boy stumble toward the stool with obvious terror. The hat took its time with him too, and Harry wondered if it was considering the boy's family history, his grandmother's fears about associating with Harry, the weight of expectations that had been placed on someone who clearly wasn't ready for them. Gryffindor! The hat finally announced, and Neville's relief was palpable as he hurried toward the Gryffindor table. Malfoy, oh, Draco! Strutted to the stool with obvious confidence, and the hat had barely touched his head before shouting, Slytherin! The boy's smug satisfaction was visible from across the hall, and then McGonagall called, Potter! Harry! The great hall fell silent as Harry walked toward the stool. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, hear whispered conversations about his recent legal battle with Dumbledore. At the staff table, Dumbledore watched him with that familiar calculating expression, while Professor McGonagall's stern face betrayed nothing of her thoughts. The hat settled over Harry's eyes, and suddenly the great hall disappeared, replaced by a space that felt like the inside of someone's mind, ancient, wise, and infinitely patient. Well, well, said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Harry Potter, I've been waiting to meet you properly. Properly? Harry asked. Oh, yes. Albus Dumbledore has been most insistent over the years that I understand your unique requirements. He's visited me several times to discuss your eventual sorting, to ensure I fully appreciated the symbolic importance of placing you in Gryffindor. Harry felt a familiar chill of recognition. He wanted to control where I was sorted. He wanted to ensure that the boy who lived would be placed in the House of Courage and Nobility, where your parents were sorted, where the story would make the most sense to the wizarding public. The hat's mental voice carried a note of distaste. He was quite concerned that I might sort you based on your actual personality and abilities, rather than on what would best serve his narrative. And what would you choose, based on my actual personality? The hat was quiet for a moment, and Harry could feel it sifting through his thoughts and memories with gentle curiosity. Fascinating. You have courage, certainly, more than most adults I've encountered. But it's not the reckless bravery of the typical Gryffindor. It's calculated courage, the kind that weighs risks and chooses to act anyway, because the cause is just. What else? Intelligence, obviously. You've learned to think strategically, to question authority, to analyze complex situations. Ravenclaw would value that. Loyalty as well. You've formed deep bonds with those who have earned your trust. Hufflepuff would appreciate your sense of justice and your willingness to work hard for what you believe in. Harry waited, sensing there was more. And cunning, the hat continued with something like amusement. Oh yes, you've learned to be quite cunning when necessary. The way you've outmaneuvered Dumbledore, built alliances, controlled information, Slytherin would be proud to claim you. So I could go anywhere? You could. The question is where you would do the most good, both for yourself and for the changes you want to make. The hat paused. Tell me, Harry Potter, what do you want from your time at Hogwarts? Harry thought of his conversations with Sirius and the others, of his letters to families, of his growing understanding that individual change required institutional change. I want to learn, he said slowly. But I also want to teach. I want to show other students that they don't have to accept everything they're told just because it comes from authority. Or I want to make sure no one else gets manipulated the way I was. And where do you think you could best accomplish those goals? Harry considered the question seriously. Ravenclaw would give him intellectual peers who valued questioning and analysis. Hufflepuff would surround him with people who shared his sense of justice. Slytherin might teach him more about the political maneuvering he'd need to create lasting change. But Gryffindor is where people expect me to go, Harry said finally. It's where Dumbledore wants me. If I choose it anyway. But on my own terms, it sends a message. What message? That I'm not running away from the fight. That I'm willing to work within the system to change it. But I'm doing it because I choose to, or not because someone manipulated me into it. The hat's approval was warm in Harry's mind. Wisdom beyond your years, young Potter. Very well, but remember, your house will not define you. You will define what it means to be in your house. The connection between their minds faded, and Harry found himself back in the great hall, blinking in the light from the floating candles. The hat had been silent for what felt like a long time, and the whispered conversations had grown louder. "Gryffindor!" the hat announced finally, its voice carrying clearly through the hall. The Gryffindor table erupted in cheers, but Harry noticed that the applause from the other houses was more subdued. Some students looked curious, others worried, a few openly hostile. He had expected as much. His conflict with Dumbledore had divided opinion throughout the wizarding world, and Hogwarts would be no exception. As he walked toward the Gryffindor table, Harry caught sight of Dumbledore's expression. The headmaster was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes, and Harry had the distinct impression that the older man was both pleased and wary. Dumbledore had gotten what he wanted, Harry Potter in Gryffindor, but not the way he wanted it. Harry took his seat at the Gryffindor table between Ron and Hermione, accepting congratulations from his new housemates while keeping one eye on the staff table. This was just the beginning, he knew. Tomorrow would bring classes, interactions with professors who had been told who knew what about his situation, and the daily challenge of building genuine relationships in an environment where everyone had preconceptions about who he was and what he represented. But tonight, surrounded by his housemates and watched by a headmaster who could no longer predict or control his choices, Harry Potter felt something he'd never experienced before, the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where he belonged, for exactly the reasons he had chosen. The sorting continued around him, but Harry was already thinking ahead to the challenges that awaited. Changing Hogwarts wouldn't be easy, but then again, the most worthwhile things never were, and he no longer had to face those challenges alone. Chapter 12. The New Beginning. 3 weeks into the term, Harry Potter realized that changing Hogwarts was going to be even more complicated than he'd anticipated, and far more rewarding than he'd dared to hope. It started small, the way most revolutions do. A comment in the common room about why Gryffindor had lost 20 points for Harry being 5 minutes late to potions when Malfoy had been 10 minutes late the same day without consequence. A question in defense. Against the dark arts about why students weren't taught to recognize mental manipulation alongside physical hexes. A polite but pointed inquiry to Professor McGonagall about whether students had any formal recourse when they felt a punishment was unfair. "You're making the professors nervous," Hermione observed one evening as they sat in the library. They're supposedly working on Transfiguration homework, but actually discussing the disciplinary discrepancies they'd been documenting. "Professor Flitwick asked me yesterday if you were planning to challenge every single school policy." "Only the unfair ones," Harry replied, making another note in his careful records. 3 weeks of observation had revealed patterns that made his stomach churn. House bias in grading and discipline, favoritism toward pure-blood families, and a systematic discouragement of students who asked too many questions about the reasoning behind rules. "That might end up being most of them," Ron said with a grin, but his expression grew serious as he looked over Harry's notes. "Blimey, Harry, you've really been paying attention. I never noticed half of this stuff." "Most people don't," said a quiet voice from behind them. First they turned to see Neville Longbottom approaching their table, his usual anxious expression replaced by something that might have been determination. But once you start looking, it's hard to stop seeing it. Harry studied his housemate carefully. Neville had been keeping his distance for the first few weeks, clearly uncomfortable with the attention that came from associating with Harry, but something had changed recently. "What do you mean?" Harry asked gently. Neville glanced around to make sure they weren't overheard, then leaned forward. "My grandmother told me to stay away from you. Said you were trouble, that getting involved with your situation might put our family at risk." He paused, his hands clenching and unclenching. But then Professor Snape happened. Harry felt his stomach drop. What did he do? Same thing he always does. Made me feel like I was worthless, like I didn't belong in the wizarding world. But this time, instead of just accepting it, I started thinking about what you said that first night, about how adults can be wrong, even when they're in positions of authority. Neville's voice grew stronger. "Professor Snape treats me the way he does because of who my parents are, doesn't he? Because they stood up to people like him during the war. Neville, they're not dead, you know," Neville continued, and there was pain, but also pride in his voice. "My parents, they're innocent Mungos because Death Eaters tortured them trying to get information about where you-know-who went. They chose to be tortured rather than betray that secret. And Professor Snape treats me like I'm nothing because I remind him that some people chose to fight rather than surrender." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Harry reached across the table and squeezed Neville's shoulder gently. "Your parents are heroes," Harry said quietly, "and you're braver than you know. It takes courage to question someone who has power over you." "I want to help," Neville said simply. "Whatever you're doing to make things better here, and I want to be part of it." Over the following days, their small group of friends began to expand. Susan Bones, whose aunt had been instrumental in freeing Sirius, brought a sharp eye for legal details and a network of contacts among the other Hufflepuffs. Luna Lovegood, a dreamy first-year Ravenclaw who saw patterns others missed, pointed out inconsistencies in how different professors treated students from different backgrounds. Even some Slytherins began approaching them quietly. Students like Daphne Greengrass, who was tired of being expected to follow her family's political views without question. "We're not trying to tear down the school," Harry explained to their growing group during one of their informal evening meetings in an unused classroom. "But we're trying to make it live up to what it claims to be, a place where all magical children can learn and grow, regardless of their blood status or family connections." "But how?" asked Dean Thomas, a Muggle-born Gryffindor who had been documenting the different standards of explanation given to students from magical versus non-magical families. "The professors have all the power. The headmaster has all the authority. What can we actually do?" "We can ask questions," Harry said. "We can document problems. We can support each other when adults try to isolate or punish us for speaking up. And we can show everyone, students, professors, parents, that there's a better way to do things." Their first real success came during the second week of October. Yet Professor McGonagall had taken 15 points from Gryffindor because Harry had questioned Professor Snape's grading of his potions essay in class. When Harry politely requested a meeting to discuss the matter, she initially refused. "Mr. Potter," she said stiffly, "you cannot simply question every decision made by your professors. There must be respect for authority." "I agree completely," Harry replied, which clearly wasn't the response she had expected. "I think authority should absolutely be respected, but I also think that authority should be worthy of respect, and that means being fair, consistent, and willing to explain decisions when asked." Professor McGonagall studied him for a long moment, her stern expression wavering slightly. "You sound remarkably like your mother when you say things like that." "Thank you," Harry said. "I consider that a compliment." She was quiet for several minutes, staring out the window of her office at the grounds where autumn was painting the trees in brilliant colors. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than Harry had ever heard it. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Several apologies, actually. I should have questioned your placement with your relatives. I should have insisted on regular welfare checks. I should have recognized the signs that something was wrong when you arrived here, far more mature and strategic than any 11-year-old should need to be. Professor, I failed you, Mr. Potter. I failed you because I trusted someone else's judgment over my own instincts, and because I was more concerned with maintaining institutional stability than with protecting a child in my care." She turned to face him directly. "I'm asking for your patience while I try to do better." "Can we work together?" Harry asked. "Not just you and me, but all of us, students and teachers, to make Hogwarts a place where everyone feels safe asking questions and expressing concerns." McGonagall's smile was small but genuine. "I think that's exactly what this school needs." The changes that followed were gradual but unmistakable. A suggestion box appeared in each House Common Room, with McGonagall personally reviewing every submission. House point deductions began to be accompanied by written explanations of the specific rule violated and the reason for the penalty. The students who felt unfairly treated were given a formal process for appealing disciplinary decisions. Not everyone approved. Professor Snape grew even more hostile, his punishments becoming more creative in their unfairness. A few of the older Slytherins, particularly those from Death Eater families, made their displeasure known through increasingly bold attempts at intimidation. Even some Gryffindors grumbled that Harry was making their lives more difficult by rocking the boat. But for every student who resisted change, there seemed to be two more who were grateful to finally have someone willing to speak up for fairness. Letters began arriving from parents who had heard about the reforms through their children, some critical, but many supportive of efforts to create a more equitable learning environment. But the most significant letter arrived in mid-October, delivered by an owl that Harry recognized as belonging to Sirius. Harry, it read, "I've received formal permission from the Board of Governors to visit Hogwarts next week as your guardian to discuss your academic progress and welfare. This will be the first time in Dumbledore's tenure as headmaster that a student's guardian has requested such a meeting. I think that sends exactly the message we want to send. I'm proud of what you're accomplishing there. The changes you're making might seem small now, but they're the foundation for something much larger. Keep asking the right questions, and keep protecting the younger students who don't yet have the courage to protect themselves. Your mother would be so proud of the man you're becoming. Love, Sirius P.S. Remus sends his regards and asks me to tell you that the first-year defense curriculum has been mysteriously supplemented with several texts on recognizing and resisting mental manipulation. Apparently, some professors are beginning to see the value in teaching students to think critically about the adults in their lives. Harry read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and tucking it into his robes. That evening, he sat down at his desk in the dormitory and pulled out parchment and quill. Ron was already asleep, snoring softly in the bed next to his, but Harry felt wide awake. "Dear Mum," he began, then stopped. This wasn't a letter that would ever be sent, but somehow it felt important to write it anyway. "Dear Mum, I don't know if you can hear me wherever you are, but I wanted to tell you that I understand now why you were so worried about Professor Dumbledore. You were right to be suspicious. You were right to want me to question authority and choose my own path. Your letter saved me. Not just from the Dursleys, and not just from Dumbledore's plans for my future, but from becoming someone who accepts injustice just because it's easier than fighting against it. I'm at Hogwarts now, and I'm trying to make it better. Not just for me, but for all the students who come after us. The younger ones who might otherwise learn to accept unfairness as normal, or who might be sacrificed for someone else's idea of the greater good. I promise you that I'll keep protecting them the way you tried to protect me. I promise that I'll keep asking the hard questions and fighting for what's right, even when it's difficult. I promise that your sacrifice will mean something more than just keeping me alive. It will mean that other children get to choose their own futures, the way you wanted me to choose mine. Thank you for being brave enough to leave me the truth. Thank you for loving me enough to die for me, but also for loving me enough to teach me how to live. Your son, Harry. As he sealed the letter and prepared to place it in his trunk alongside his mother's original message, Harry heard a soft knock at the dormitory door. He opened it to find a small group of first-year students from various houses, a Hufflepuff who had been struggling with Professor Snape's favoritism, a Ravenclaw who felt excluded because her family weren't the right sort of purebloods, a Gryffindor who was afraid to speak up in class because his older brother had been labelled a troublemaker. "Harry," whispered the Hufflepuff, a boy named Ernie Macmillan. Could we talk to you for a minute?" Harry stepped out into the corridor, closing the door quietly behind him. "Of course. What's on your minds?" "We heard about the changes you've been working on," said the Ravenclaw girl, Padma Patil. "About making things fairer, about students having a voice. We wanted to know, how do we get involved? How do we help?" Harry looked at their young faces, 11-year-olds who should have been worrying about homework and Quidditch and whether they'd make friends, but who were instead grappling with institutional injustice and adult manipulation. "You help by never accepting that something is wrong just because someone in authority tells you it's right," Harry said gently. "You help by supporting each other when adults try to divide you or make you compete for scraps of approval. And you help by remembering that questioning authority isn't disrespectful, it's necessary." "What if we get in trouble?" asked the young Gryffindor, Colin Creevey. "Then we'll face that trouble together," Harry promised. "That's what we're building here, a community where no one has to face unfairness alone." As the younger students returned to their dormitories, Harry stood in the corridor for a few more minutes, looking out through a tall window at the grounds of Hogwarts. Somewhere in the castle, Dumbledore was probably planning his next move, was trying to figure out how to regain control over the narrative of Harry's life. Somewhere else, professors were grading papers and planning lessons, some of them beginning to question their own methods for the first time in years. And in dormitories throughout the castle, students were falling asleep with the knowledge that their voices mattered, that they had allies, and that the adults in their lives could be held accountable for their actions. It wasn't the end of the story. Harry knew that. There would be more challenges, more resistance, more moments when it would be easier to give up than to keep fighting. Dumbledore wouldn't abandon his plans easily, and not everyone would welcome the changes they were trying to make. But it was a beginning. A new kind of beginning, or built on truth and choice, and the radical idea that children deserved to be protected by adults, not sacrificed by them. Harry Potter had come to Hogwarts as a victim who had learned to fight back. He was becoming something far more dangerous to the established order, a young man who was teaching others that they didn't have to be victims at all. In her letter, his mother had warned him never to let anyone convince him that his life was worth less than their cause. Now, he was teaching an entire generation of witches and wizards the same lesson. Some revolutions, Harry thought as he finally headed back to his dormitory, began not with armies or declarations, but with children who refused to accept that the world had to stay broken. The future, for the first time in his life, felt like something he could shape rather than something that would be imposed upon him. And he was no longer shaping it alone. What if Petunia Dursley left, Harry on the Weasleys' doorstep, at age 3, and Molly raised him as her 8th child? What if the Sorting Hat refused to sort Harry until Dumbledore answered for what he had done to the boy? What if Hermione used a time-turner to go back to the night Harry's parents died, and found Dumbledore already there watching what? If Minerva McGonagall quit Hogwarts at age 60 and raised Harry in a cottage in Scotland, far from Dumbledore's control, what if Sirius Black and Fleur Delacour arrived at the Dursleys? on the same night, both determined to take Harry and never bring him back. What if Cedric Diggory survived the graveyard and testified that Dumbledore knew the tournament was a trap? What if Bill Weasley broke every ward Dumbledore had placed on Privet Drive and found dark magic that should never have been nearer? What if Hermione found a locked room in Hogwarts that contained every child Dumbledore had sacrificed before? Harry, what if Severus Snape took Harry the night Lily died and raised him in Spinner's End without telling a soul? What if Victor Krum offered Harry asylum in Bulgaria after the Triwizard Tournament and Hermione helped him escape? What if Harry walked out of Hogwarts in front of the entire school at age 12 and Snape was the one who held the door open? What if Pansy Parkinson overheard Dumbledore's plan in the dungeons and warned Harry before it was too late? What if Lily Potter left a second letter hidden in Gringotts and it named every person Dumbledore told her to trust? What if Amelia Bones launched a full investigation into Dumbledore after Harry's name came out of the Goblet of Fire? What if the Hogwarts portraits came alive during Harry's trial and every former headmaster testified against Dumbledore? What if Neville Longbottom's grandmother, Augusta, demanded Harry be placed with her after she learned what the Dursleys had done? What if Draco Malfoy switched sides at age 13 after watching Dumbledore send Harry into the Chamber of Secrets alone? What if Arthur Weasley found Dumbledore's name on a ministry surveillance order for Harry filed the day after Lily and James died? What if the Goblin Nation declared Harry a protected ward of Gringotts and told Dumbledore he had no authority over the Potter vaults? What if Kingsley Shacklebolt found Harry during a routine or a check on Privet Drive and reported the Dursleys to the Ministry? What if Remus Lupin found Lily's diary in the ruins of Godric's Hollow and every entry was about Dumbledore's demands? What if Madame Pomfrey documented every injury Harry arrived with each September and handed the file to the Wizengamot? What if Blaise Zabini and Hermione Granger formed a secret alliance in third year to get Harry out of Dumbledore's grip? What if Neville Longbottom was the boy who lived instead, and Harry grew up free until Dumbledore came looking for him at age 14? What if every Hogwarts student in Harry's year signed a petition against Dumbledore, and Luna Lovegood delivered it to the Daily Prophet? What if Fleur Delacour brought the French ministry's auras to Hogwarts after the third task and demanded Harry be released into her custody? What if Dobby smuggled Harry out of Privet Drive at age 6 and hid him in the Room of Requirement for 5 years before? Hogwarts what if Winky the House. Elf testified at the Wizengamot that Barty Crouch, Sr., knew about Dumbledore's plan for Harry all along.